if your candidate gets in there, Senator Sanders, he is, to me, historically, the perfect candidate of the California Party, because the California Party is fairly left. It's a progressive party. It just is. Way back to Stevenson, it was always a tough party for the center. And then you have a guy who can buy media in L.A. market, which is the biggest market, not the second biggest market, but he can buy it. Jerry Brown, the governor out there, once told me you can buy your votes up. You can just keep buying and buying and buying, and the numbers do go up to a point. So that's, to me, the battle. Money versus ideology.
Or get the Democratic Party to change its rules for you because you are buying off the party as well.
What would the rule be?
I mean,
under the Constitution,
to get them on the stage. I mean.
Oh, that's right. But I want to ask you about this money thing, because under Buckley DeLeo, the constitutional ruling, a guy or woman who has all the money in the world and can spend all that money, and I bet that Mike Bloomberg makes enough on a daily basis to finance this campaign. How do you beat him?
Well, he's doing that, Chris, already, and we should be ashamed of that as Americans, people who believe in democracy, that the oligarchs, if you have more money, you can buy your way. Now, but to your point.
Do you think Mike Bloomberg's an oligarch? Come on.
He is. I mean, he's not. He skipped Iowa. Iowans should be insulted. Not going to New Hampshire, buying his way into this race, period.
So, I feel like, has anyone here ever had, night terrors?
Buddy, I got a DM to invite you to.
Yeah. So, you know how, it's like you completely feel like you're awake, but you can't fucking move. And then, just these, shadow ghouls come and just, start eating your toes and shit like that. So, I feel like this week has just been, one drawn-out night terror where instead of ghouls eating my toes, it's just a bunch of fucking pundits and politicians who know what I'm thinking, but know that I they won't listen to me, so they're just dancing around while I'm screaming in my head. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Wow.
I just had an image of Mike Bloomberg eating your toes for a second.
You pour a bunch of salt on it first.
Yeah, he eats them. He eats them more naturally than he does ice cream, at least.
What was that?
Oh,
I don't know.
We talked about that in the Working People Protean crossover
roundtable. We had a whole segment on this.
We legitimately don't think that he knows how to or has ever eaten a pint of ice cream in his life. What is the spoon? I must hold it myself.
Whom amongst us doesn't take a nice pint out of the fridge, out of the freezer, and then stab at it with a spoon?
This week, yeah.
Yeah, good point. It was tough. I went to the bodega earlier to, get a few supplies for the canteen before doing the show here, and it was up between some Haagen-Dazs and then a Sixer, and you see what won out here. And to show some real colors, this is a local classic, some Mr. Boston blackberry flavored brandy. It's good. It keeps you warm in the winter, but it's, if you're hanging out by a river in the summertime, it's pretty tops.
I had an incredibly traumatic experience with ice cream this weekend.
Please.
I'm debating whether or not to share it.
Please tell us.
You just got this fucking distant look in your eyes, and I could hear I could hear Vietnam sounds playing in your head.
That's the new Ben and Jerry's flavors, 1,000-yard stare.
Because the reason why I hesitate is when I came in on Monday morning, everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, Shane, what happened?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "You look like shit." And it's like, "Well, thanks," but and then I told them this story about the ice cream, and they're like, "Okay, what else happened?" I was like, "No, that was it." And I'll just tell it. I'll just say, I was in the grocery store like one is, and I find myself in the frozen treat aisle, And I'm always looking for creamsicles, the classic creamsicles, and seeing if they're there. They weren't there, but they had these, like, it was like Reese's Peanut Butter Cup popsicle things, right? And they look so good on the box. So, of course, I'm like, I'm going to buy these. I bring them home, pop them open, and the first thing I notice is that they all melted and then, like, reformed. They must have been there forever, you know?
Oh, man.
So they were all, like, melted, and, like, so the entire integrity of the shape was just obliterated. It was you had to just, like, you know, put it in a little cup to eat it instead of eating it off the popsicle stick, which as an adult man is something I like to do. And so at least I took solace in the fact I was like, well, even though these look totally fucked up, they're going to taste great. And they didn't. They were awful. It was a terrible ice cream product. And now my freezer is full of these fucking things. Oh. And every day when I open the freezer to, you know, look and grab some ice or some frozen peas or whatever, I'm just confronted with this failure of mine. Like, because I can't throw them out. I'm going to feel like a total asshole if I throw them out. So they're just going to sit there in limbo until I can pass them off to somebody else like a curse.
This whole thing feels like a metaphor for Mike Bloomberg's mayoral time.
Thank you for injecting some political meaning into my, like, fat treat, like, sadness.
The cold chain had been broken on Michael Bloomberg's campaign. Can we get an F going in the chat for Shane?
That's rough, man. I know what that's like, and I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm definitely the kind of person who will still get high and eat the shit out of those and just, like, not enjoy 1 second of it.
Yeah, exactly.
If we had to, like, look at the other side of it, would anybody like to share any high notes of sweets that we've had during this week? That's bleak. That's bleak,
Wrong,
guys.
no. Out.
That's bleak.
Cut his mic.
No. It was just a setup so I could say that I ate an enormous amount of Pockies today.
You bastard. I love Pockies.
Yeah.
Email me some Pockies, dude.
I'm happy to. They're very, very good.
We're happy for you, man.
I didn't want it. You know?
Did I ever tell you this story of when I, like, appropriated a pallet of Pockies? I never told you that. I'm not. It's too long and just not relevant.
Are we talking like theft from organizations? Because this is actually probably salient.
Hey,
the topic of our show.
You keep teasing us with these stories, and then you're like, no, I can't. I couldn't. I mustn't.
Come on, man.
And then you just, like, whip around like lightning strikes. You're like, well, if I must, I'll tell you.
Old Shano's fireside chats.
It's just a list of grievances, like peaks and valleys, all attached to, like, weird treats. You know, it's just my life is just a series of bipolar food decisions. You know?
When you say, like, a pallet of Pockies, though, do you mean like an actual pallet of Pockies? Like, how many? How long did you have them for? Months?
I had them for a long time. That's all I'm gonna say on that subject.
Oh, God.
I had multiple Pocky parties. Let me just put it like that. Okay? Like, I was known as the guy. If you wanted some Pockies, you could come see me. You know what I'm saying?
There surely had been some, like, scary primetime news, like local news thing, like teenagers are doing Pocky parties in suburban homes across America.
Rainbow Pocky parties.
No.
You know, I wish I could say it was off-brand to think of Shane as just like the dealer in the corner with the hoodie, just being like, "Yo, man, I got some Pockies. I got some," but I feel like it is on brand.
I'm like hanging outside the store with a big overcoat, and I open it up. I've got, like, off-brand Pocky sticks just hanging. He's like, "What do you want? I can help you out. You don't need to go in there. You don't need to go in there for nothing."
I got Pookies. They're just as good. I mean, this begs the question, like, what is the largest quantity of, like, something that, like, you held on to. Like if you just somehow like woke up and like walked out your front door and there was like, just like 5 boxes of I don't know, like peanuts, and like you didn't give them to anybody. You ate all those peanuts over the course of like the next 3 years. Like,
oh my God.
I had like, I used to work at a Chinese restaurant in my hometown. It was down the street from my house. And when I was like 16, I decided to like buy out the boxes of fortune cookies that we had at the restaurant. And like these boxes are just like these giant cardboard boxes of like, I don't know, like 1,000 or 5,000 individually wrapped fortune cookies, and I bought like 6 of them, and just had fortune cookies chilling for over a year.
Yes,
over a year. Never got tired of it. It's so great. It's the greatest shit ever.
Did you like show people when they came over?
Oh hell yeah.
Yeah, it's
Like,
the best part.
Like, please take some of these. Like,
Yeah.
I've had these for 6 months. Please, it's great though. You just get drunk and eat fortune cookies. Come on.
That's one of my favorite things about accumulating like a lot of anything. Like when somebody comes over to your place, you just immediately I'll bring somebody over. I'll open up my fridge and be like, look at all that salami. Look at that. That's crazy. That's crazy. Take some, please. Take some salami from me.
Too bad the billionaires don't do that shit with their money.
The billionaires think they know what resource anxiety is manifested as. They have no fucking clue. Hey, Bloomberg, wake me up when you got the salami fridge.
That's what I don't understand, like, with these guys who are running, right? Because here's my thought, right? Especially with the guys we're going to be talking about today. It's so clearly an attempt to use that wealth in a very, like, naked way to buy an election, or at least like buy their way into the political arena or into the national arena, which presumably for some of them, especially these guys we're talking about today, who don't really have like a path to victory or whatever, it's like it's for some prestige thing, or rather than necessarily like the genuine desire to win. So if you're gonna do that and you're gonna throw all your money anyway, like, why not just like drive a fucking car down Broadway and just toss money out at people? You will immediately buy way more goodwill, or like do that, or like do that in conjunction with just like fund a bunch of like projects outright. I mean, we talked about this when we did like the Bloomberg episode, and we brought it up a number of times. Like, you could just like fix Flint, Michigan, go on TV and be like, here's $100 million.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Undercover boss, but for municipal projects.
Right, exactly,
Oh, there's do you guys know, okay, this is slightly related. Did you know that there is a reality TV show where this fucking, I think he's a billionaire, sets this shit up where he's like, I want to build a business, and it's like this barbecue business, except it's a contest, and whoever wins the contest gets the money to like start a business, and he like contracts these people to do hours and hours of work and doesn't pay them the entire time that they film the show. It's like months and months of filming, and he just doesn't pay. I have to figure this. I got to figure out what the name of it is. Like, my mom was watching it the other night, and like we were watching like one of the last episodes, and these dudes are like taking money, like taking time out of work to do this reality TV barbecue business show. And at the end of it, he's like cutting them checks for like $5,000 for like months of work. Months.
But what the hell were they building the whole time? So like they don't get to
It's like an actual barbecue business. So like they're building from the ground up this business, this restaurant, this recipe, and he like contracts all these people to run the business, and he's like there to give advice on how to like responsibly build a business. And like at the end of it, some of the workers get like $5,000, or some of them get like $10,000. Some of them, if he likes them enough, get 20. Like, and then ultimately, whoever he hands the business off to, one of them, whoever did the best job.
I'm not digesting this very well, if I have to be honest. I'm fucking shaking. That's not. If anybody should fucking understand how a business is made, like, anybody can fucking build a restaurant. The fucking hardest part is coming up with the scratch to do it.
Right.
Like any company that or any like startup business is very fucking simple. Like there's fixed cost and there's variable cost. In the case of like a restaurant or something like that, the fixed cost would be like renting the space, securing a lease, renting the equipment, getting it installed, setting up with like vendors for like foodstuffs and stuff like that, deliveries, fridges, electric bills, and all that shit. Anybody can do that. And then there's like variable costs, which are like staffing, the food, the weekly deliveries of food and shit like that. So what and like the only variable that would be different is like how much fucking paprika you put in the rub. Like, so what the fuck is the point of that?
No, I don't think you get it, Dwight. He has a new idea called a restaurant.
Oh, God.
That's the market coming up with innovations, That's like fresh, new ideas. That's what we need.
Yeah.
Like,
great.
how you eat at home? Like, it's that, but disrupted.
Disrupting the barbecue industry by destroying worker protections.
A co-eating space, a co-eating pod of sorts.
Oh, the WeWork of restauranteering. How about that? You open up like a bunch of just like open space restaurants with like different kitchens, and then people can like rent them for a certain amount of time, like little pop-up restaurants.
Like a food court?
Yeah, but with an app.
Yeah.
There's like an app involved. There's another stage.
Right, because that's how you disrupt the food court industry. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Oh, you could order on an app. Somebody write this down, because I am not going to remember it.
Guys,
this is too good.
Stop recording. This is proprietary. Please sign this NDA.
But this, I mean, like this is something I was talking to Ashley Rodriguez, who's a great host of a great podcast called Boss Barista, which kind of looks at kind of the job of being a barista and like the political economy of like coffee. Folks should definitely check out that podcast. But Ashley was kind of posting about how like if you're gonna fire employees, like you should be like required to provide like severance, like no matter what. Like it's the least that employers can do. And like inevitably, like you get this litany of bootlickers kind of coming on and saying like, but small businesses can't, they can't do that. They can't provide severance. It would kill them. And it really got me wondering, like what the like ideological function is of the small business, right? Like it's kind of like this ideological grease trap of American capitalism where, it becomes kind of like the excuse of first resort when people want to talk about like all the concessions that we should be making to capitalism and to private industry. Like Mel was kind of saying, it's like, like it's all like driven towards like what can we do to kind of ensure that this business does X, even at the expense of working for fucking free, and just like, creating a race to the bottom for everyone involved. It just got me thinking like, well, shit, I mean, like small businesses, like we talk about needing to save small businesses. I don't know, maybe this is like a hot take, but like at the moment I'm starting to wonder like if the kind of good that a small business can give like outweighs kind of the bad in terms of like how small businesses like function as like an ideological justification for the worst bullshit in capitalism.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I think that even to a certain extent, like the binary created there is a weird one, and I mean it is one that's created by like, the capitalist class, especially like right wing ideologues. It's always like hailed, like, oh, we don't want to hurt small business owners or whatever. When in reality, it's not like worker protections or like minimum wage laws or any of the regulatory measures we have tried to pass or at one time had, right? Like those did not inhibit small businesses. What destroyed small businesses was monopoly capitalism and big box stores. Like just factually, like that's what happened. That's why mom and pop shops are like going out of business. It's because of fucking Walmart. It's not because the government is making them pay X amount of money to their workers or provide, these like conditions for them. It's fucking, Walmart. It's Amazon. That's the reason why small businesses are, have been closing in America for fucking 30 years.
Well, on the flip side of that, like small businesses also are like this sort of like mini world of like the worst practices of capitalism in a lot of ways. I know of a couple of small businesses in my hometown that are just absolute shit to their workers, right? And they feel the same. It feels the same as if, you know, a CEO would just like fuck over 1,000 people. The same thing happens with small businesses all the time, where they close without any notification to its workers. People just show up and the doors are locked one day, or certain people are not taken care of based on identity. There have been multiple times where like an entire staff of LGBT people have been just completely like fucked over and have lost their jobs because the manager has a bone to pick with their personal lives, you know. And I think that as far as like worker protections goes and small businesses in general, why don't we just like move toward worker owned small business models? It's not that hard, right? It would be like the perfect way to practice that sort of model, right? In a small business type setting, you have the ability to sort of work out the kinks of what a worker owned business looks like.
I mean, fucking yeah. Like obviously, the way to mitigate the ill effects of, a business hierarchy in which there's a small group of owners and then, you know, majority of employees, just their own little fucking fiefdoms, is to have a worker co-op.
Right.
But under capitalism, like we just described, like I was just saying, how the first thing you need to start that business is the fucking scratch, is to have that money to start it up. So, in this country, we don't even have like a federally guaranteed right to first refusal. You know, if an owner wants to sell the business, we should have a right to first refusal, which is, you know, that the workers themselves get the first bid to try to purchase it from the owner. But secondly, what we should have is like a federal guarantee that the government can underwrite the business on behalf, the startup costs of a business on behalf of a group of workers. Because like if I was in a union of like iron workers or something like that, and we did like rebar fabrication or something, we would need to do is get the lease for a shop, buy the equipment to do the rebar fabrication, the bending, and all that stuff, and then the variable cost of like buying the rebar. Well, where are we going to get that startup cash if we're just been workers ourselves and are living in the American Thunderdome of capitalism, where we barely have enough expenses to, you know, cover a $400 expense, unexpected expense? We wouldn't have it. So yeah, like theoretically, the government should underwrite something like that.
It's like GoFundMe, but federal.
Man, well, like so there are two thoughts that I had on that, because to Shane's point, I agree that like, yeah, the binary isn't like, you know, as strict as you know, some may present it, and it kind, I mean, but that kind of connects it to what I think we were both kind of dancing around, right? Was that like with, you know, the kind of increased power first of big box stores like Walmart, and then with behemoths like Amazon, you know, like that, as you hear from any small business owner, right, you know, like puts these small businesses at a disadvantage. They don't have the kind of resources, not only kind of the infrastructure to, you know, sell their product with as far of a reach as somewhere like Amazon, but they don't have kind of the capital to, you know, lower their prices the way that Amazon can. They just don't have the infrastructure. They don't have kind of the scale of the operations. And so inevitably, they push, you know, like the cost of competing onto workers. I mean, they'll say that, like, you know, we may raise costs like a little bit, but consumers, you know, ultimately, you go to a Barnes & Noble, you pick up a book, and you're like, well, I can get this for like $10 cheaper on Amazon, and you walk away, and bing, bang, boom, you're done. And so the other option, if you want to try to keep prices down, is to, you know, screw over your workers, right? You know, pay them like shit, you know, like try to skirt around whatever responsibilities you have as a business owner. Like, that's, I think, what I was getting at is that, we fall over ourselves to excuse every failing of small businesses and to kind of give them this sort of privilege pass as if like it is their birthright to own and operate a business, and as if like that right somehow trumps workers' rights to earn a living wage and live with the kind of dignity and respect that we all deserve. It's just like I don't know, it's kind of a lost cause, because I feel like we've all collectively as a country acknowledged that like the rights and privileges of pieces of shit who want to kind of be the bosses will always trump those of working people. But to Dwight's point, I actually I don't, hopefully this doesn't come across as tenuous as I'm worrying it might, but I actually do think that's kind of like a perfect analogy for like what we're going to talk about in regards to like Bloomberg and Steyer and how they fit into this political process, right? Like in the same way that the problem with like kind of being a competitive actor in the marketplace is having kind of the startup capital to do so, right? We have that similar problem with Bloomberg and Steyer and pretty much any candidate really. It's just like, if you even want to be part of this political process, if you want to compete at this level, the amount of money and the amount of kind of institutional and private support that you're going to have is staggering. Like, I really don't think that any average citizen, myself included, kind of can really wrap their head around just the sheer amount of money that goes into running like a successful presidential campaign. But it really speaks to kind of like the systematic way that anyone but plutocrats are kind of excluded from that political process unless they can somehow, against all odds, create a campaign that is funded by small donors.
Millions and millions and millions of dollars. Didn't Bernie Sanders like spend like $50 million over the last quarter, right?
Yeah.
And that's like on the lower end of the spectrum for spending for the DNC campaigns. I keep thinking that, the DNC is broke as fuck, right? Like they owe millions of dollars to multiple banks, credit card companies, previous Democratic candidates. And I just see the future where they're going to ask for a loan from one of these billionaires and be beholden to the interests of those billionaires, if they weren't already like clamoring for it. You know what I mean? Like, in contrast, the RNC is completely solvent. Like, they don't have debt. They have $45 million in the bank. And the DNC is like $27 million in the hole because they can't raise money. And like, I just see this happening. Like, it's just going to be another year where the DNC is going to ask for money from these billionaire fucks. And it's going to continue to erode what little tiny shred that of credibility that the Democratic Party has. Tiny. Like when Bernie Sanders dies, they lose all credibility, essentially,
So step one, Bernie, don't die.
Yeah.
Can we get him some B12 or something?
Yeah, our grumpy Uncle Bernie is going to be alive for the rest of humanity.
Yeah, that dude's got more energy than I do. I know that much.
That's very true. I would have just rolled over and died if I had a heart attack, so.
Yeah. I am not a healthy man. and I don't care who knows it.
Same.
A report just came out yesterday, and it said that Bernie Sanders has received more votes from people under 30 than Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump combined. And I get my inspiration, I get my energy from you. I get my energy and inspiration from people who have an idealism, who want to transform this country and make it a lot better than it is today.
All right. Well, we are here with a special crossover episode with our comrades from Eat the Rich. We got Dwight and Shane. We got comrade Mel from Protean magazine, and we got me, Maximillian, from Working People. So, if you're listening to this on the Working People feed, then, you're pretty well acquainted with me and the show, but this is a show where I interview workers from around the country. We talk about their lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles, but we also do a lot of other types of episodes, shorter episodes, bonus episodes, special crossovers like this, where we kind of bring more folks into the conversation and we address kind of the bigger kind of issues that come up on the show or that listeners want us to address, right? Stuff that, speaks to, the needs and struggles of working people. And so, we've been getting a lot of requests from listeners to, help our listeners, wade through all the bullshit that comes with, a presidential election season. You may have already listened to our first big kind of crossover panel that we released last week with Mel, me, Light of Gold from Current Affairs, Brian from Strike Wave, and Ash from the Horror Vanguard. That was a really great and expansive conversation where we kind of broke down the top candidates going into Iowa from a working class perspective, and we tried to focus on how these candidates themselves kind of address the issues that a lot of working people care about, and we also tried to offer some thoughts on like how working class folks should approach elections, right? How much energy should they devote to them? What should they hope to get out of them? How should they figure into like a much broader struggle? And this is kind of a follow up to that. That conversation went over really well, and I think we want to try to make these sorts of crossovers more of a regular thing. Not only to bring in great and sharp perspectives from comrades who are doing good work, but I think also it's important that as left media outfits, it's important that we build solidarity with each other. It's important that we bring our audiences in conversation with each other and expose our listeners to the great work that's being done beyond our respective shows. And one of the most obvious parts about like the kind of constant headache of presidential elections, right, is just kind of the myopia of the corporate media coverage of elections. And it seems like all we ever talk about is how shitty the media coverage is of Bernie, or like how ridiculous the coverage is of the clusterfuck in Iowa, and so on and so forth. And so in that regards, I do feel that it is like a political project to build a kind of left media space where we can talk about these things and get our listeners and other working people kind of involved in a sort of grassroots bottom up media effort to really address the things that corporate media doesn't. So that's kind of like a my spiel. But as a follow up to our big panel last week, we wanted to kind of convene this special panel between Working People, Protean, and Eat the Rich to talk about two candidates that we kind of we gave a stay of execution on the last panel because we wanted to devote a special time to these two guys because they are they do have kind of a special place in this election, right? Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg are among the richest people in the world, right? They are billionaires. They are running in this race. Bloomberg has not set foot on a debate stage yet, but his campaign ads are everywhere because the man is worth was it $60 billion? So we wanted to kind of give ourselves a little space to talk about like what we should make of these candidates, what their histories are, what their presidencies might look like, and also like what the fuck it says about our political system that, billionaires are able to kind of buy their way into becoming viable candidates in our electoral system. So, this is kind of a tall task, and it may just evolve into us kind of screaming and throwing our feces at the billionaires, but hopefully it'll be...
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Hopefully it'll still be worthwhile to everyone listening out there. But, before we get going... why don't we go around the table real quick and kind of introduce ourselves and introduce the shows and other stuff that we're working on.
Hi, I'm Mel G. I am now the podcast editor and producer of the new Protean podcast called We Regret the Error. This podcast is going to be exploring how leftists of all stripes choose to engage with and create media, and we want to provide a platform for our writers, poets, and artists to talk about their work, their politics, and their projects. We have a lot of really fun stuff planned over the next couple of months, and I'm really stoked that I finally got to talk about this podcast because I've been working on it for months. So, yeah, that's me.
Shane?
Oh, you do the intro. You have it committed to memory.
Yeah, hi.
What do we do?
Hi, this is Dwight from Eat the Rich. I play rhythm guitar. Eat the Rich is... Go ahead, Shane, please. I see it on the tip of your tongue.
No, I'm just going to say, I'm Shane.
Oh, good.
That's my setup to you then to
good.
explain.
Eat the Rich is a podcast that I think is about to release its 25th episode, so it's very much in its infancy, and that's why we feel honored to be amongst giants here today. But yeah, our tagline is that we have a show about millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations, and we dissect them, allegedly. I mean, we describe what they... we describe their ills in a generally anti-capitalist lens, and we try to have a little bit of fun along the way.
Hell yeah! Now, if this is listeners' first time, hearing about Eat the Rich, but I can't imagine that's the case for many people. Definitely go and check out their show. It's really, really great. A lot of fun to listen to. And yeah, I think amidst all the fun, you guys do have a really great kind of critical commentary that I really appreciate. And Mel, yeah,
Thank you, Max.
I think that what y'all are doing at Protean is really cool. Not only at the print magazine, but I'm really, really excited for this podcast. I know you've been putting in a shit ton of work for it. I think it's going to be really great. There are a lot of podcasts out there, obviously, but I think that the more folks that we have kind of doing this sort of great work, the better, honestly. And, so hopefully, now it should be, a little clearer, why we felt this was a good group to kind of bring together to dissect the Billionaires Caucus of Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York. So where do you guys want to start? I mean, I feel like first we should know who the fuck these people are, right? We should at least kind of dig into their backgrounds, kind of lay out the general arc of their political careers, maybe try to fill in some information that doesn't come across in the 8,000th Bloomberg commercial that you see in between commercial breaks for football games and shit.
How do you want to do this? You want to just start with Steyer first? You want to start with Bloomberg first? I mean, both of them suck, if that's helpful.
I was going to start at 9/11 because that's my favorite place to start with when I tell any story.
Lead us, Max. What's your preference?
Yeah, why don't we start with Steyer, right? Because, I mean, Bloomberg, even though he is the most recent to enter into the race, I feel like listeners will at least have some reference points for knowing who Mike Bloomberg is. And as I aforementioned, his ads are fucking everywhere. So I think, maybe to kind of put him on a slightly more equal footing, we should start with the person that we kind of in general know a little less about. Because I'll admit, like, I didn't really know a whole lot about Steyer, and I'll also admit that against all of my, impulses, I found myself starting to like him, at least insofar as I found his thirst for wanting to be Bernie's friend kind of cute. But ultimately, for researching the show, I came back around to thinking that he's a total piece of shit, and people this rich should not exist. So why don't we dig into Steyer first?
Yeah, please come see Dr. Dwight. I'd be happy to cure you of this ailment, because
Doctor, I found myself liking Tom Steyer. What do you prescribe?
Oh, well, firstly, tell me if you have insurance, and then we can talk.
But doctor, I am Tom Steyer.
So I got to be honest. I mean, Eat the Rich. I think individually we were all kind of tweeting about this when Tom Steyer had like a little rehabilitative moment in the media when he tried to make good with Bernie, because one of the first episodes that we did was called, I think it was like episode 4 we did, called The Rich Boys of the Democratic Primary. And we talked about John Hickenlooper, RIP, John Delaney, RIP, and Tom Steyer. And what killed me, and especially in like even kind of some of our like left Twitter buddies who were kind of like, oh, this is actually kind of cute. We kind of like how Steyer, his affect is being. But at the end of 8 minutes from now, you will feel as much rage as we do for Tom Steyer, because he is an exceptionally bad man. And even though he has the affect of kind of a jovial, aloof dude that buttons the bottom button of his blazer, I noticed, which is a complete fashion faux pas, and as a billionaire he should know that, but he has done nothing but exploit the global south in his entire career. So I'm just gonna go on here and rehash some of the things that have been occupying our minds since I think we did this episode about this dude. I can't overstate this enough. He had one of the most comfortable upbringings of anybody on the Democratic debate stage. He grew up, born in 1957, grew up in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He went to the Buckley School and then Phillips Exeter Academy, and then went to Yale, and then ended up getting his MBA from Stanford. And immediately after that, he worked for Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and then founded his own hedge fund called Farallon Capital in 1986. And as we were talking about in the intro, where do you get your startup capital? How does the working class get startup capital? Well, it's not a problem for one of these gilded Fauntleroys that went to that grew up with a silver spoon, because he got $15 million in seed capital he raised from his former colleagues at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. Pretty cool, huh? So he kind of farted around for that for a little bit, but he ultimately wanted to do like some big hedge fund stuff. And in order to do any big hedge fund stuff, you have to get a lot more capital. So he, who had his networks at elite universities, having gone to Yale and Stanford, he approached Yale University's endowment, right? So their charitable foundation. And just as a quick side note, I mean, most of these elite universities, especially the Ivy League, are just like these hedge funds attached to academic institutions attached to hedge funds, right? I mean, I think Harvard has like the GDP of most countries, like in its endowment. So he approached Yale's charitable endowment to allocate funds for Farallon to manage. Now, initially, and we just got to do a little bit of a understanding here of how hedge funds typically work. Yale, the endowment, declined initially based on the fees charged by Farallon. So typically in the business model of hedge funds, there's a charge for clients for the money who they're managing. The hedge fund managers charge their clients 1% to 2% of the fund's net assets. So for instance, if you're a fund that's managing $1 billion in assets, you'll receive $20 million per year for managing the assets. Obviously, there's different benchmarks and incentives, to performance bonuses if you get certain tiers of return on investment above what you had initially promised her clients. But so initially, Yale said, okay, we're going to give you some money, but basically you got to do it for free for a little bit. Not a big deal. This happens all the time, when a new car company wants to get into the American market, for instance, they'll be cheaper. Like, initially Honda in the 1960s was a cheaper alternative to some of the American brands, but now Honda is obviously, an enormously well-respected and not super inexpensive brand in America. So he got a lot of dough, assets under management, and here's what will cause the blood vessels to burst in your eye. Fairlawn Capital Management, Tom Steyer's hedge fund, practices what's called an event-driven international investing strategy. And what they do is they find distressed international companies and help those businesses restructure. As an example, in 1999, Fairlawn bought a direct stake in an Argentine shoe company, which had helped stabilize to profitability as Argentina recovered from an economic crisis. So just to run that back, Argentina in 99 was in an economic crisis. Fairlawn Capital, Tom Steyer, swooped in like vultures and took hold of a large shoe company in order to extract profitability off of it. One of the more sinister examples was in 2002, Fairlawn bought control stake of Bank Central Asia, which was an Indonesian financial institution, for $530 million. At the time, many of Indonesia's banks were on the verge of collapse because of bad loans made during the then President Suharto's leadership, and the country was seen dangerous for foreign investment. So from 2002 to 2006, Fairlawn installed a new chairman and made, quote, necessary reforms to get them to profitability. In 2006, Fairlawn sold its stake for profit, and as a result, a huge influx of institutional investors turned to Indonesia for returns. And eventually, after Fairlawn had exited, the amount of foreign capital basically buying up pieces of Indonesia's economy reached like $1 billion in 2007, and then a year later in 2008, $4 billion. So Tom Steyer has made his money off of exploiting the global South. This is one of the things that kills me is like a lot of these buttoned up bastards are like just some of the most crooked and despicable, like dirty vultures out there. I would like to open up this time for questions before I move on to other things. He's not a good man. He hurts people for money. I don't know how to express this anymore.
There's another one too that is a little bit closer to home. That might also ruffle some feathers that I wanted to talk a bit about. I don't know if you had this in your notes, Dwight, or if you were going to cover it, but I was going to talk about the private prison that he that he invested in. The Fairlawn Capital Management, his hedge fund, bought a number of shares in the Corrections Corporation of America, which is the largest private prison company. And actually, Steyer had increased Fairlawn Capital's investment in it in 2005 to 5.5% of the shares of the company, which was roughly at $90 million was the valuation of that. Now, Yale had a backlash to this because of, again, the relationship between the two of them. And what the faculty and students at Yale pointed out is that the company's management had a very bad human rights record, racial injustice, all of the things that are associated with the private prison industry. And he stood up for his company, and he stood up for the investment. In 2004, he sent a letter to the students of Yale, and he said, "We are proud of the work we have done and continue to do for the portfolios of universities." And he declined to go and meet with his critics there at Yale. This story kind of got buried. It didn't really get much attention at the time. It got resuscitated in 2016 as Steyer started to kind of enter the political domain a bit more. He was a big contributor to Obama. He was a delegate at the 2008 and 2012 DNCs. But yeah, that just kind of got swept under the rug, and it was never spoken about again. But he, they invested in this company. They did not back down, and he defended it personally. He said it was a good investment, and part of the reasoning there was like, it's investment decisions like this that enables me to give money to you. That was basically his reasoning.
So that answers some questions about why he has absolutely no position on restoring voting rights to incarcerated people.
I would love to. I want to point out the contradiction on climate change for him, but I just want to say to that point, Shane, for anybody that's listening, for anybody that's attending a university right now, I highly recommend you taking a look at your university's charitable endowments quarterly report to see what their assets are being invested in. I guarantee you, there's stuff in there that is like just transparently bad, and it's so helpful to protest the shit out of them to try to see if they can divest from some of those stocks. I mean, defense contractors, I just take a look at it yourselves, because this was something I was really involved in at college, and it was amazing. But going back to Tom Steyer, I think one of the things that pisses me off the most about him, so one of the biggest investments that Fairlawn Capital has done under Steyer was in coal mines in Australia. I just want to say that one more time for context. Remember the billions of acres, don't quote me on that, a lot of land in Australia that has been incinerated, and the actual billions of animals that have been killed because of climate change in Australia. Tom Steyer personally profited off of coal production in New South Wales. He was made an enormous hundreds of millions of dollars investment in a 4,000-acre mine in New South Wales that is churning carbon coal out for the next 30 years.
This is directly related to the wildfires.
This is directly
Australia.
related to the wildfires. Yes.
You love to see it.
Mining at the site, it's called Maules Creek, Maules, Maules Creek, started in 2015, and they will be mining coal there for up to 30 years, generating about 30 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. If I'm not mistaken, the mines together, I'm just reading from this New York Times article, the mines together have increased in their annual production by about 70 million tons since they received money from the hedge fund, from Fairlawn Capital, according to corporate records. That is more than the amount of coal consumed annually by Great Britain. Just a staggering amount of fossil fuels coming out of this guy. And again, directly profiting off of that, Tom Steyer is.
No, but he's the climate change candidate.
But yeah,
Haven't you read the op-eds?
the community-led plan, right?
Yeah.
It's great.
He's the climate change candidate in that he's one of its causes.
That's correct. That's correct.
I have made this. I believe I'm the only person here who will say unequivocally, this is my number one priority. I know that we have to deal with this crisis. I know that we have to deal with it from the standpoint of environmental justice. I've been working on this for more than a decade. I've taken on oil companies and beaten them on environmental laws. I've pushed clean energy across this country. I've prevented pipelines, and I've prevented fossil fuel plants. But what I know is this. Not only can we clean up the air and water in the Black and brown communities where our pollution is concentrated, this is also the opportunity to create literally millions of middle-class union jobs well paid across the United States of America. Our biggest crisis is our biggest opportunity. And if we don't declare a state of emergency on day one, I don't understand how we go to the people around the world to lead the coalition that has to happen and that only America can lead.
Yeah, he's a very, very bad man. He walks around and looks at people like how I tweeted about this earlier this week, that's saying I was just thinking about it. I'm like, how the fuck do billionaires show their faces in public? It is a shameful thing to be hoarding this amount of wealth around. And this is the analogy that I came up with, and I don't know if it's useful, but you guys be the judge. It's like the analogy for a billionaire is like there's this plague, an epidemic, and a billionaire gets a vaccine for it, so he's vaccinated from it, and then carries around a sack full of vaccinations for the plague, and people are dying on the street and asking him, like, please give me one of these. You only need one of them. Why are you carrying all this? And he's like, no, I'm just gonna keep all these. It doesn't make sense.
I mean, to the point of the whole like showing your face thing too, and I don't want to harp on this because I understand, you know, in the weird spectacle of the primary and things that happen online, how like, you know, things very quickly can just become like mimetic moments or whatever. But the whole like minor brief rehabilitation of Steyer, because he had the stupid awkward moment with Bernie, and then like later he was like trying to get his attention or whatever. It's like, it's not only the idea of showing your face, but then to try like the whole idea of like, oh, I can associate myself with this like kind of lefty populist guy and maybe like, you know, wash out some of the fucking guilt or whatever it is that he personally carries around with him. And I'm sorry, a photo op is not enough in any circumstance. It's just not enough to do that. You know, if he, you know, the whole idea too that these guys then turn around as what Steyer did, and it's like, well, now I'm going to be a philanthropist. I'm going to like, you know, try to advocate for the climate. It's like, motherfucker, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
If you really wanted to, you know, do something, if you really felt that pang of personal guilt or whatever it is inside of him that motivates him to do that change around, right? Why not just give up all your money? Just give it all up. Walk the rest of your life as a pauper. Say, I learned my fucking lesson. Please forgive me. Do that. Don't like continue to live this life of absolute luxury and try to buy, you know, people's fucking points with like a smile or a handshake on TV. One of the most annoying things that I saw that happen as a consequence of that too is that, you know, then there's a lot of chatter and stuff happens online and people are like, oh, he would make a great, you know, EPA secretary. No, he fucking wouldn't. No, he wouldn't. The only role he should have in climate change is he should be subjected to, I'm gonna stop.
No, yeah, please. We're guests, Shane.
I'm gonna stop talking.
We're guests, Shane. Please.
No, honestly, I think it's an act, man. Like, you read through his policies on his website, and they all sound so nice. Like universal health care. We're gonna be doing. I support this. We're gonna expand the strong public option and like make sure that the private insurance marketplace is competitive, and you know, go on and on and on and on. And you think, like, looking through it, it seems great, but I really think it's just an act, man. I don't think that man has any remorse for anything that he's done, period. Like this fucking philanthropy pledge that he and his wife signed, where it's like, we'll give away all of our money before the end of our lifetime. It's like, that's garbage. It's fucking garbage. All of your donations are tax deductible, man. Like, you're making money off of the shit that you donate. Like, there's nothing there. It's just this performative bullshit. And I think this entire campaign is performative bullshit. He thinks that he's doing something interesting. And really, I just think it's an act, man. I don't think he has any remorse for the money that he's made. Seriously. He just doesn't like the fact that another millionaire has, like, gotten into the presidency and made all other millionaires look bad. Honestly, like, let's be real. The first time that I heard of Tom Steyer was his impeach Trump campaign.
Oh God!
Like,
and how did that go?
Yeah, I wonder if people are going to ask him about that, because prior to the acquittal, he was still railing on in press junkets all over the country about how he single-handedly engineered the impeachment trial.
Oh, please.
Nice, dude.
Yeah, and God, can you imagine how much money he sunk into that campaign, and for what?
I mean, it goes back to you know, the point that y'all were making before, right? Is like, I know it seems fanciful and ridiculous, but like, seriously, to whoever's listening to this, like, ask yourself, if you really want to kind of have an informed opinion on, you know, the viability of Tom Steyer or Michael Bloomberg as presidential candidates, like, I think you first need to get over the initial question of, like, would they do more for this world and for the people of this country if they just gave away all their money? Right? It, you know, would if they just gave it all away as opposed to running for president, would that be more of a net positive for humanity than it would them running for president? I think it is. I legitimately agreed that that Steyer would be doing more for this country if he just gave up his wealth than he would running for president, right? Then once you wrangle with that question, then we can kind of start to discuss the more kind of political questions about his policy and stuff like that. But I think everyone here's points are very well taken. It's just like, is this just a vanity fucking thing? Like, I mean, what good is it actually doing for you?
Fuck all.
Absolutely nothing. Well, and here's a really good illustration of that, right? I took a moment to sort of compare and contrast the wealth tax plans that are offered between Steyer and Bernie Sanders. And Tom's plan has anyone worth $32 million or more will pay 1% in wealth tax. Anyone who has $500 million to $999 million will pay 1.5%. And anyone who has over $1 billion will pay 2% wealth tax on the money that they make. If you have anywhere from 0 to $32 million, you pay a 0% wealth tax, right? And Tom is like, got this whole thing where it's like, over 10 years, it'll be $1.7 trillion that we can put back into the economy. It'll be super great. And on its face, it sounds great, right? Until you contrast it with Bernie's plan. Bernie is doing a 1% tax on net worth above $32 million this is for married couple, right? So it means a married couple with $32.5 million would pay a wealth tax of $5,000, but it goes up from there. 2% for 50 to 250 million, 3% for 250 to 500 million, 4% for 500 million to a billion, 5% from a billion to 2.5, 6% from 2.5 to 5, 7% from 5 to 10 billion, and 8% on wealth over $10 billion. And these brackets are halved for singles. So regardless of if you claim that wealth personally, or if you claim it as part of a married situation, you're going to get fucking taxed on it. And you're going to get taxed more. And if you look between the two plans, there's a difference of almost $3 trillion over 10 years between the two plans, right? So if you look at that, you're like, oh, well, 1.7 trillion, that would cover our student debt. We could be able to pay down all of our student debt in 10 years, right? But like, how much is Steyer worth?
1.6 billion.
1.6. So he would pay 3% less on his own wealth tax plan than he would pay on Bernie's, which is a lot of money.
I'm sure it's just a coincidence.
Totally a coincidence. Yeah, right. But you think about this, you're like, dude, you talk this huge game about he's like quoted in these like articles where people are like quoting the Bible to him about how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven, and he's like, well, maybe I won't be rich, right? This whole bullshit where he like presents himself.
Do it now.
Yeah, right. Please, fuck, but he's gonna die rich, extremely wealthy, while millions of people are likely going to die because of climate change or worse, and like he's not going to give up this money. And it's very clear even in the policies that he talks about. It's all about private options and private investment in, capital for climate change and like all of these stupid fucking capitalist programs that I think he himself probably has personally benefited from in some measure or another over the last 25 years, Fuck him.
Just on that last point about capital for climate change, the only market solution to climate change is to just continue to cause it. There is no market viability to help ameliorate the problem.
Correct.
There isn't.
Right. And like he's got these programs where it's like we'll hand out $350 billion a year or whatever in sustainable community projects, and it's like who is that money actually going to? Developers, people who are going to gentrify cities in the name of a green new city, right? Like I would like to see what the end point is for that. It sounds all great on its face, like communities are going to be able to lead the charge against climate change. To me, it sounds like A, he's passing the buck, and B, it's not necessarily going to be something that's actually going to be beneficial for the people who are going to be hit the hardest because of climate change that he personally has a hand in. So, fuck Tom Steyer.
Max, you can cut this if you'd like, but I don't know. I scrolled to the bottom of my notes on Tom Steyer. and I'm sure it's unrelated to him, but I just have the sentence, eaten at an Ivy League supper club.
Expand on that.
Paint us a picture.
I don't know where it came from.
Well, I mean, like, and I think you guys, gave a pretty solid kind of description of like, why, like private equity firms like the one like Hellman and Friedman, which Steyer, worked for, private equity firms are just fucking bloodsuckers, right? I mean, like we'll include some links in the show about, how private equity firms have kind of like become just this parasitic force, sucking up, like all the basic resources and needs from housing to raw materials to whatever, to newspapers, to media outlets, and just suck them dry, strip them for parts, and make a killing while, hurting working people. We'll include some links to kind of break down, where the state of our kind of discourses on private equity firms and stuff like that. But, I wanted to also mention, this is something that we talked about in the last panel. I got the opportunity to kind of give the anti-stance for Amy Klobuchar, which is kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. But, I obviously talked about, Klobuchar's long history of abusing her workers, of, doing really underhanded shit, whether it was like throwing objects like at them on the regular or just berating them to the point of tears, to calling, if a worker, a staffer at her office tried to leave for a new job, she would call the place that she was applying to and shit on them and like, ruin their applications. Right? I mean, she's a terrible person, and I think that matters, right? Because she tries to spin it as like, oh yeah, do I push too hard sometimes? Sure, but that's because I expect a lot of my staff and I expect a lot of this country. It's like, so what? You want to treat us like that? Like, yeah, like so you want to be elevated to the position of the presidency where suddenly like the entire country is going to be kind of in that subservient staff position that you can just push and treat like, pieces of human garbage. Like, no, that doesn't sound too appealing to me. I think it's worth, kind of giving Steyer, like a similar treatment in that vein. Because again, like I said, there's a whole lot that we don't know about him or how he operates, how he would operate if he was elevated to the level of the presidency. And one thing that I wanted to kind of just add to the conversation so far is I was reading through this great and pretty harrowing rundown from Splinter News on the working conditions of at Next Gen America. Which used to go by Next Gen Climate, and that's the political action group that Steyer himself founded in 2013. Yes. Right, so Steyer, as y'all mentioned, he has poured a shit ton of money into Democratic elections. Right, he poured $70 million into 2014. 75 million in 2016, and a whopping 120 million in 2018. So just a quick, footnote that is more money than any of us will ever see in 100 lifetimes. Just a quick reminder. All right, just a quick reminder that we are talking about inordinate sums of money, the likes of which are as incomprehensible to us as the size of the fucking universe. Right? I think that's one way that people like Steyer and Bloomberg are so able to fly under the radar, is because people just really don't have a handle on how different your life is and how different the world looks when you have that much money, right? And leaving aside the fact of everything that you have to do and the harm that you have to cause people and the planet to get that much money. So, a lot of the money that Steyer dumped into the Democratic elections was funneled through Next Gen America. Right, and a lot of the people working there, were like these field organizers, right? It's people who, mainly young people who are like fresh out of college or who are still in college, doing just a whole lot of grunt work for like 10 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know, registering voters, knocking on doors, calling and texting voters, signing volunteers up to help out, and all that shit, right? So, you know, back in August of 2019, HuffPo reported on Next Gen in an article that has just the most incredible headline that reads, quote, "A liberal sweatshop is quashing its workers' efforts to unionize," end quote. So Alexander Kaufman and Molly Redden, you know, they note that Next Gen staffers had you know, recently voted to unionize. But at the time, they were still awaiting recognition from management because management was dragging its feet, right? You know, instead of recognizing the union, management was challenging, you know, the inclusion of some employees in the bargaining unit. And reportedly, they were challenging up to 80% of the people who were included in the bargaining unit. And I mean, this is a classic fucking union busting tactic, right? Instead of, you know, acknowledging your workers, you know, right to unionize, right? You try to kind of hamstring them in these kind of fucking procedural legal battles, questioning like who within, you know, the workforce at your company is like legally allowed to be part of this bargaining unit, because obviously the more of them in that bargaining unit, the more power that they have, and they don't want you to have that power. So this is something that was happening at, you know, the political action group that Steyer himself founded, right? And you know, back in the Splinter article, you know, they have a lot of testimonies from field organizers, and we're going to include links to this in the show notes, and I would highly encourage folks to check it out. You know, if you, like me, were for a second kind of getting, you know, swept up in the kind of fuzzy media coverage of Steyer. So I just kind of picked one to read out real quick. So, you know, one of the Next Gen field organizers in Florida talked about, you know, just like working for this organization, you know, just described like harrowing, you know, scenes of widespread burnout among staffers. Like, you know, everyone was like, yeah, you know, they kept saying that we were going to get a day off if it got approved, and they never got approved. They even tried to kind of mitigate that by saying like, oh, you know, on Fridays you can leave at 8, and that's like you still have to come in like, you know, at 7 the next morning, but like that's your like day off, as it were.
Are you fucking kidding?
I mean, the turnover rate at Next Gen in all their kind of offices around the country is staggering, right? And you know, that's kind of what this one organizer speaks to. So they say, quote, when I was there in the office in Florida, and I think this person was working on the Andrew Gillum, was lobbying for like Andrew Gillum's campaign through Steyer's political action group. So they say, when I was there, just in the state of Florida, it seemed they were losing about an organizer per week. Lots of people were quitting and taking jobs with campaigns that paid literally half as much. They had so many vacant positions before the election that they were actively hiring barely a month before election day, right? And so, you know, again, yeah, just like with Klobuchar, right? I know that some people will kind of, their knee-jerk reaction will be like, well, are you just cherry picking kind of bad things, you know, in a person's past? Like Steyer is like, you know, not part of Next Gen anymore. You know, like, can he be held accountable for it, or how much should it matter? Right, like, look, like I think these are fair questions, but I think like really they're missing the larger point, right? Which is that this person wants to run the fucking most powerful country in the world, right? And you are kind of, they have more money than you're ever going to see a lifetime. They're aspiring to attain more power than you can even conceive, and we're right. Sitting around making all these excuses for them, right? Because we're trying to piece together some semblance of an idea of what their presidency would actually actually look like based on like the information that we can find about their previous, history. And in that regard, I do think, just like Klobuchar's treatment of her workers matters. Right. The ways that Steyer, like Mel was saying, like, he can talk a good game. He can make this political action group that, is perhaps well intentioned. But like that kind of tells you everything you need to know about like who this candidate is. Right. Like there's a lot of nice sounding fluff there that's trying to kind of capitalize on maybe some progressive talking points. But if you look at like the actual institutions that Steyer himself has created in the past and the ways that he has run them, and how people working in those campaigns have been just dehumanized and overworked, and how they could barely retain staff, like if you want to like run a country like a Steyer-led action group or business, this is what it looks like. This is like what achieving Steyer's goals in the past has looked like.
So he's not good.
Not good, folks.
Is he good or bad? I can't tell. I need to know. I think Max, it's a great way to frame it, because I think like sometimes what gets lost, particularly in a primary season, which is like all about these kind of weird, spectacular press, pseudo events and things, and moments like the debates and stuff, and especially for people who don't necessarily have a whole lot of background into knowing who like these people are, and the first time they're seeing them is in the context of this. Like you're gonna get a lot of like surface reading stuff, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me whether or not he's really a nice guy.
Nope.
Like, I don't care if interpersonally he's nice. Like, maybe he genuinely is, like, a sort of cutesy, or, like, has an affection in his heart for Bernie, really likes him, and is like, oh, it'd be so nice, like, if, maybe me and him could, like, work together on some progressive cause or whatever. None of that fucking matters. What matters is, the material reality of the position that he's in, as well as you're pointing out, like, what is the culture that breeds within the organizations that he's tasked with? And so then what kind of culture would be then brought into the presidency? That's what matters a whole lot more than like whether or not somebody's interpersonally nice. I really don't give a shit.
We're never gonna meet him. We're never gonna meet him.
Yeah. I don't care if he kisses my baby. These weird metrics are so like so clearly farcical, right? When in reality, right, like as you're pointing out, it's about looking at, like, okay, what kind of organizations do they run? What's the track record of those organizations? What's the internal structural culture of those organizations? What's the power structure within them? And then, because the idea is, if you're assuming that the president is going to have any effect, right, which is the presumption if you want somebody policy-oriented to be president, then they're going to, ooze that into the fucking administration and all of their appointees and all the decisions that they make.
Right. I mean, just look no further than Trump, right? I mean, the
right,
Trump's
exactly.
administration is being run like one of his businesses. That's why it's like this. It always reminds me of the scene from what was that shitty zombie movie, World War Z, right? Where like all the bodies of the zombies are just piling up to kind of get over that wall. Like that is like Trump's like business model. That is his like corporate culture, right? That is why, since the beginning, this fucking administration has just been shedding bodies left and right to the point that we could hardly remember any of them. Remember fucking Mooch, right? Remember fucking Flynn?
I was just thinking about Mooch, dude. We were just talking about Mooch.
I saw him not that long ago.
You saw the Mooch?
Mooch sighting.
What did I say? He's a spiffed up, short looking motherfucker.
Yeah, but I mean that's what I'm saying is like that's the I think you're absolutely right, Shane, that like that sort of corporate culture that they bring with them. This is I think Bloomberg is absolutely leaning heavy on this and saying that he's going to kind of bring his managerial style and skills to government.
Well, that's what they always. I mean, that's what they say, right? It's like, oh, you need somebody who can run an effective business to run the government, as if the two things should be conflated.
Right, yeah. First of all, they shouldn't even be fucking conflated. And second of all, if we're going to even bite on that bait, if we're going to say, okay, I'll humor you for this 1 second, then it does matter, and we do need to look at how those businesses are run, or how the operations that they've been involved with have run, like what sort of imprint they've left on them, and then try to extrapolate from that, what we would have to look forward to. And, we'll get into Bloomberg in a second, but I do, think that we're all in agreement that with Steyer, given the sorts of institutions and organizations and operations that he has involved himself in, that he has thrown his money behind, that he has used to make more money for himself and for, his business partners, right? I mean, what is there that leads you to believe that, a Tom Steyer presidency would be one that is working in the best interests of working people? I don't see it.
None. Can I say none? He's. I just want to say too, nice is a tool. Anybody can be nice.
Not me.
No. I don't give a shit if he holds the door open for somebody, if he's contributing to the death of the only known life in the universe. I ain't about it, is, I think, a really nice way to say it.
How's the brandy coming?
Thank you for reminding me. I should probably have a little bit more of medicine here. Thank you.
It's I'll tell you when I've had enough.
You think this is the only bottle I got?
Well, and I mean, this is what, Mel was kind of digging deep into, right? I mean, she was looking at, Steyer's policy proposals and I think, really kind of drawing a through line between, kind of everything that we've been talking about here and, at least the nice face, of the kind of policy bent that Steyer, wants to move forward with.
I'll also quote a great thinker, if I may, which is Mel from Protean magazine from the last episode, if I may. Mel, I believe that you said that a lot of the bad things that Trump did during his administration were via executive orders.
Right.
So if Steyer wanted to say, hey, we're putting a kibosh on all the import of coal or something, would he do that if that would personally affect the bottom line of his hedge fund?
Absolutely not.
Fuck no.
No, I don't think so. Absolutely not. It's the idea, right? It's profit always over people. It does not matter what you talk about on your stump speeches, on the debate stage. The second you get into the Oval Office, you surround yourself with people who have the exact same motivations that you do, and you will not sacrifice profit over someone dying on the streets outside. I think, we wanted to talk a little bit about just billionaires and their place in politics. And I keep thinking about, now I don't know the total history, but I keep thinking of Tammany and the political organizations, right? That are funded by these wealthy people from their inception, at nearly the inception of our country in the 1790s, constantly building a political base out of immigrants who are poor and disaffected and feel that they can see some success and then fucking them over. And I feel like these billionaires are just digging into a long, long, storied legacy of the state of American politics. It's just a little bit more insane because we're living through it at this point.
I think I have a little bit of a juicy tidbit on Bloomberg when we get to him. That'll be echoes of Tammany.
I'm teeming with it.
Dwight's teeming.
Teaming with Tammany.
Before we move on from Tom Steyer, I do want to bring up something that is very important to me in terms of policies and proposals. And it's the Tom Steyer official position trademarked on education and student loan debt. And I read through some of his policies, and I just wanted to touch on one thing that just grinds my gears. The man talks this huge game about reducing student loan debt, reducing interest rates, having a robust public service option, right? He never talks about canceling student debt because I'm sure in some back channel Cayman Islands bank account, he's making a fuckload of money off of that interest somewhere. But he does talk about this concept of loan forgiveness for teachers, and like using that as a way to sort of pass the buck again. And like the loan forgiveness program as it stands, I believe there's like the Teach Grant is like 5 years in high risk or low interest areas for teachers. Like if you teach English in a city that needs English teachers, then you can get a grant that'll pay off a portion of or your loans or pay off a portion of like your future education. His loan forgiveness program is it's great. You'll get your debt forgiven after 10 years and after you've made 120 loan payments.
What?
So dead serious. Yeah.
Nice.
Are you serious?
Nice.
So, you can sign up for this loan forgiveness program. That's great because, you'll be able to be a teacher and you'll be doing something great for K through 12 education, which, yeah, on its face sounds great. But you have to work in what is likely not going to be improved conditions for the current teaching staff for 10 years, and you have to make 120 loan payments. That is half of your loan debt.
Yeah, because he's going to pay for it.
Right. And it's like, where are you going? I just...
Cool.
I just find all of these policies look great and sound great, and whoever wrote the copy for his website made them sound perfect. But when you actually like dig into the details, and by the way, his education policy is one of the only on his website that actually has a white paper attached to it. There's nothing else. There's nothing necessarily on his community-led plan for clean air and water, like his Bill of Rights. Sounds great on the face, right? The right to health, equal voting, clean air and water, learning, a living wage. He's hanging his hat on the fight for 15, even though that's been an outdated number for a minimum wage for what, like 4 years now? Mm-hmm. Like there's no information about how he would actually push that through. And when you think about how much money he put into the last election cycle in stacking the House with Democrats, all for impeachment that didn't actually do anything, it's not hard to see that he would do the same. Even as an executive, function, he would pass that off to his wife or someone else, and they would also stack the deck with people who would make it extremely easy for him to continue to pass these fucked up policies that are earmarked onto the bottom of these seemingly benevolent bills. It's the same shit. It's the same fucking cycle every fucking year. There's no difference. It's just worse because now he can self-fund his campaign and he has no donor base, small donor base that can say, dude, what the fuck are you doing? Like, I think a lot of the reason that Bernie's campaign has been so successful and a lot of the reason that, we as outspoken members of the left have been able to sort of continuously push him into more socialist policies is because the donor base is made up of working class people who are constantly talking to him about this doesn't go far enough. This isn't perfect. This isn't perfect. This is going to fuck my family over. And he goes, you know what? That's right. Like just recently, didn't he include concessions in the Medicare for All plan that made it so that unions had the ability to either hang on to some of their health benefits or get that the difference between their public insurance option and the money that they would have spent on the private health benefits back into their pockets or something. He just made a change to that like a couple of days ago. And that was because the unions were pressuring him to address that in his Medicare for All plan. Right? No other candidate, honestly, particularly Bloomberg and Steyer, would say, you know what, that's probably a good idea. Thanks for talking to me about that. They would be like, fuck off, dude. I don't care. Like it's the same shit. It's just, the dude lives in California and can play off this kind of like goofy, sort of weird, like my wife went to Stanford, we love each other kind of bullshit. You know what I mean? It's just.
Well, I mean, to that point, too, not to force the transition to talking about Bloomberg, but just,
Please.
that like the thing with Bloomberg is his whole thing is like, I'm not going to take money from anybody, which means he's literally accountable to no one.
Exactly.
What the fuck is that? It's not even like he has a donor class. It's literally just like whatever my whim is.
Didn't he spend he and Steyer spend like what $340 million on their campaigns in just the last quarter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very legal, very cool.
I want. If you're listening to this, think about that number. Think about what it would mean to you right now if you had $340.
Oh, buddy.
You know, like just think about that. And then you can look again, and I mean, I don't know if we're gonna end up getting to this in like a wrap up or whatever, but again, like the total inviability of either of these candidates as like serious like contenders for the Democratic nomination, it's like this is all just like pissing into the wind. It's all just money gone. It's just evaporated, right? Like it's been wasted, entirely wasted.
I could buy a pallet of blackberry brandy.
That would be great. That would be so good.
Imagine how many Pockies you can get with that money.
Oh, man.
Do you think you could build like a 1-for-1 replica of like the Empire State Building in Pockies if you had $340 million?
In my presidency, that's what we'll do.
I mean, but like to make things even worse, right? I mean, I think
I'm sorry. I have to say this. I had this thought in my head. It's like the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones. But instead of 1,000 swords, it's just 1,000 pocky sticks, and I'm just sitting on it as it slowly melts. Saying chaos is a ladder. I'm so sorry. Please, Max, continue.
You there, come here.
Oh man.
Well, I mean, no, I was gonna say that, like, the number that you gave, Mel, I think it's even worse, right? Because if I understand the article that we shared, and we'll add this in the show notes, it reads that Bloomberg and Steyer spent a combined $340 million in the last quarter of 2019. The two candidates also gave their campaigns a combined $355 million in the same period. So basically double that is what I'm saying.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So they spent money non-related to their campaigns in the tune of $340 million in like less than 3 months.
No, it was on their campaign. So they spent $340 on their campaigns, like carpet bombing the entire country with political ads. At the same time, they injected a $355 combined million more into their war chests.
Oh my God!
You gotta spend money to make money. You know, that's what they say.
I have like a hard time just imagining the sheer amount of that money. Like it doesn't even register in like my own personal thought process. Like, you could build a house made out of bricks of cash with that, couldn't you?
Yeah, definitely.
I think that there is obviously a lot of connective tissue here to kind of Mike Bloomberg, and so I think that yeah, I mean this is kind of a necessary and natural progression. So let's dig into that. But I think like the point to take away from that is kind of what we were saying before, right? Is that the sheer amount of money that these two people have at their disposal, right? I mean, is unfathomable to people, right? And that I know it's a basic point to make, but I really, really want to drive it home because I think that your average kind of person who is listening to this or who is watching kind of these Bloomberg commercials, I think, I don't know, maybe I deep down I am still kind of a hopeless romantic optimist about people. I genuinely believe that, at just a basic level of trying to kind of rationalize the world around us, that, when we see, candidates like Mike Bloomberg or Tom Steyer on stage, right, we have this kind of innate human desire to try to kind of find some sort of human qualities, right? We try to find some sort of human resonance in them and their mannerisms and what they're talking about that we can relate to, right? There is at least at the most basic level in how we interact with each other, I think some sort of kind of, beautiful will to connect on, the level of the things that make us human. And while I think that's a good thing, I do really want to kind of underline in red pen, the fact that your, human experience, and perhaps by extension, your very sense of humanity and the kind of world that you live in, the kind of human you conceive yourself to be, and the relationships that you conceive yourself to have with the rest of the world are fundamentally different when you don't have $60 billion. Like just on a practical level, the amount of freedom that you have to impact the world, to do what you want, to make other people do what you want, right? That is a completely different sphere of existence, to which, a lot of the kind of human values that we are projecting onto Bloomberg and Steyer don't translate, right? And so I think just from like, maybe this is kind of underpinning everything that we're talking about here, is just like, don't allow your most basic and genuinely good human impulses to kind of understand other people and see yourself in them. Don't let those be weaponized against you to make you think that that you have, more in common with these people than you do. You have more in common with a ficus tree than you do with Mike Bloomberg. Like in terms of your life experiences, I can guarantee that you have way more in common with fucking anything else than you do with Mike Bloomberg, right? And so I say that just as a warning to not let people get kind of swept up in the game that we always get swept up in, where we are making excuses for people who have infinitely more power and money and influence than we do, because we are projecting, the better angels of our nature onto them when they live in a world and act in the world in ways that we will never really understand or be able to kind of comprehend.
Well, it's like a sort of like billionaire uncanny valley, right? When they attempt to make themselves likable or relatable to the audiences that they talk about, it falls flat. Case in point, trying to meme the fuck out of Mike Bloomberg's weird dog handshake. Face shake, you know what I mean? Or like when Tom Steyer is talking about how he doesn't see himself as a millionaire or a billionaire because his mom is from Minneapolis. Like they just don't land. These concepts that like they have some sort of intimate knowledge of what it means to be a working class person in America, when it's very clear that has never ever been their experience ever. If it looks a little weird and it feels a little weird, it's probably because it's weird, and you should trust that feeling when you look at those people.
Well said. Well said.
Fresh air, there's a siren sound up the avenue, and the street light color is a neon blue. What got into you? You're out. Storm keeps rolling on the window panes, with the ladies flying out. So you hit the streets for a midnight stroll, or just a breath of fresh air. There's a siren sound up the avenue, and the street light color is a neon blue. What got into you? What got into you? What got into you? What got into you?
on that note, all right, let's dig into Bloomberg and try to figure out
physical.
what kind of
No.
right. Let's do like a Tom Petty, like turn him into cake kind of thing. Let's dig in. I mean, because okay, so like if we take as a base assumption that there are a lot of ways that Bloomberg thinks, a lot of ways that he moves through the world, and decisions that he makes and actions that he does that are just kind of placed in a fundamentally different kind of social arrangement than anything we'll ever kind of be able to understand. What can we piece together, right, about who this person is and what he has done in his political career, and what a Bloomberg presidency would really look like? I mean, like, we'll save this, probably for the end. But Shane, you were making this point before, right? That the message of I'm not taking kind of any donations to my campaign, therefore I'm not beholden to any special interests, is so mind-blowingly bullshit. It drives me like nuts. But I think it really does speak to the core blindness, like of this whole thing, because. I was saying this on TV the other day. I was like, $60 billion is a special interest, right? Like if you have that amount of money, then you are imbricated in, global systems of finance capital. You are part of an elite world that drives like kind of your interests in a way that is fundamentally different from, the interests that regular working people have. Right? You like, if you're listening to this and you're like on your fucking night shift, right? You're not exactly running a media empire like Bloomberg, are you? Right? You have different interests than, someone who is worth this amount of money. And so, the fucking talking point that he's not beholden to special interests is such a cynical fucking red herring, because it overlooks the fact that to get that amount of money, to have that amount of money, and to have the influence that comes with that amount of money, right? Your interests are fundamentally different from everybody else's. So we'll talk about that and how it connects to like what it says about our broader political system, I think, at the end. But before we get there, what can we piece together about Michael Bloomberg?
I don't think we can understand Michael Bloomberg until we take him at his own word. And one of my favorite quotes from him, and I would love to quote him from Hurricane Sandy, when he was reassuring the people of New York that things were going to be okay. He said, and this was from a televised conference, las condiciones externas debido a la tormenta son muy peligrosas. Hay vientos fuertes. Por favor, ten cuidado.
It's like my tia. It's like my tia's on the other line.
That's nice.
She was a big smoker.
Oh, was she? Okay. I'm sorry to hear that. When we did an episode on Michael Bloomberg with our buddy Mike, and I think what the biggest takeaway from it is that in a lot of ways, governance-wise, he taught Trump how to be Trump.
Yes.
He ruled New York City as a term limit decimating authoritarian, especially a lifelong Republican, one that a mayor, which I don't know what other precedent in kind of like close American history there has been for a mayor to make an active, sustained campaign of suppression of communities of color. Michael Bloomberg did it, and he did it first, and he did it unapologetically. I can't say enough bad things about him, but I will. Shane, I know he's a favorite of yours. Please regale us.
Oh yeah, I mean, I grew up in Bloomberg's New York, and I lived my early adult life in it as well. I think he's a complicated figure, and in conclusion, Michael Bloomberg is a land of contrasts. No, I think Dwight is right on the nose there. I mean, again, we kind of went over a lot of this content. I think some of it is worth to go over yet again, because I've, even had people like crop up in our mentions and stuff whenever, I'll just say whenever one of the members of the Eat the Rich podcast goes on a long tangent or gets really angry at Michael Bloomberg, let's say at around like 2:00 in the morning, sometimes there'll be, mentions being like, well, what's so bad about him or whatever. The main kind of takeaway is understanding that like the dude is deeply, deeply authoritarian in his personality. Maybe not in the populist rendition that a guy like Trump is, where he is, using this particular rhetoric that echoes obviously a fascist or proto-fascist kind of intense, harsh xenophobia that has no qualms about like being civil or playing nice or whatever. And so of course, like Bloomberg positions himself as somebody who's like, he's he's mostly like a gentrified liberal affect, he's from that elite class and he likes to act like that in this kind of reserved manner. And so in that sense, he tries to distance himself from Trump, but in an actual policy way, like in terms of how that actually affects people on the ground, especially like the more marginalized communities, both in New York City, and then if we're talking about like, the prospect of him becoming president or whatever, right? Like simply because somebody's saying something nicer, acting in a nicer way, doesn't really matter when the fucking like Gestapo comes and like cracks your skull. Now, does it?
But actually,
the two main feathers in his cap of being like a deeply, deeply authoritarian perpetrator of a certain style of governance, which targets minority marginalized communities, and these are the things we got into our highlight episode about him, were the mass surveillance of Muslims after 9/11, and then stop and frisk, and those two things. So I guess we can walk through those.
So for those who are unfamiliar, a stop and frisk refers to a brief, non-intrusive police stop of a suspect. The Fourth Amendment requires that before stopping the suspect, the police must have reasonable suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed by the suspect. If the police reasonably suspect that the suspect is armed and dangerous, the police may frisk the suspect, meaning that the police will give a quick pat-down of the suspect. The frisk is also called a Terry stop. It was from a Supreme Court case from 1968. But according to that court case, according to the Terry court, it was called Terry versus Ohio, a reasonable stop and frisk is one in which a reasonably prudent officer is warranted in the circumstances of a given case in believing that his safety or that of the safety of others is endangered. He may make a reasonable search for weapons of that person believed to him to be armed and dangerous.
How many times have you been stopped and frisked?
Probably like 20 times for the year.
20?
Yeah.
15, 20 times.
My friends get frisked all the time. All the time.
So they frisk me, they check my bag, make sure I have anything. They was like, oh, we just stopped you because you look like somebody who robbed or stole around here earlier before.
I fit the same profile.
They said I looked like someone.
He fit the description.
I fit the description.
I looked like a potential gangbanger.
Just about I've had fit the description of somebody else that was doing something. Brownsville, East New York, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Crown Heights, Williamsburg is like the biggest hit sections of Brooklyn where they really harass people at.
The police have a generalization of black men as far as, okay, do-rag, pants sagging, Jordans. That's like 75% of like everybody.
We had just came out the house and we was walking towards the store, which is down the block. And they didn't ask for no ID. They just said, search yourself. Put your hands up so they could search them. And they searched him. I was asking him, what is it for? And they say someone just got robbed around the corner and he fit the description just like that.
He pulled me over and started searching me and all that. And me being the person I am, I felt like it was a problem with it, so I gave him a problem. And long story short, I ended up getting a broke tooth. My baby mother's mother witnessed them beating me in the back of the car on my way to the precinct. I came home from doing 13 days on Rikers Island. And when I finally seen the judge the second time, she couldn't figure out what was the reason for them stopping me in the first place.
Violated.
Degrading.
My rights was violated.
Belittled.
I simply can't just walk down the street without being accused for something that I have nothing to do with.
It's getting to a point, they're getting used to it now. When you see cops, you automatically know they're going to search you. If your pants off, you're behind, they're going to search you. But every kid's not a criminal. Every kid not doing nothing bad. But that's what they do.
95% of your murderers and murder victims fit one MO. You can just take the description, Xerox it, and pass it out to all the cops. They are male, minorities, 15 to 25. We put all the cops in the minority neighborhoods. Yes, that's true. Why we do it? Because that's where all the crime is. And the way you get the guns out of the kids' hands is to throw them against the wall and frisk them.
But, you know, as I hope you get a chance to play the clip, but as you hear in it, how it's weaponized is police officers are just say, oh, a crime happened like a few blocks away and you fit the description. But really, what it ends up being utilized as is a way to brutalize and suppress a community of color, and as was the case in New York City. And just to put some statistics to that, according to the New York Civil Liberties Union, annual stop and frisk numbers here, in 2002, or since 2002 rather, New Yorkers have been subjected to police stops and street interrogations more than 5 million times. Nearly 9 out of 10 stopped and frisked New Yorkers have been completely innocent, and 90% that were stopped and frisked were Black or Latino. I mean, just to say it again, 90% of the people that were stopped and frisked were Black and Latino. That is a targeted effort to suppress communities of color, period.
I mean, just and to echo that as well, this is one of the statistics that actually really blew my mind. Our friend Mike, when he came on, had this handy. This is also from the New York Civil Liberties Union. This was a report done from it was completed by the NYCLU in 2012, but regarding 2011, and it said that the amount of stop and frisk was higher, like the total amount of stop and frisk that had happened was higher than the total number of young Black men who lived in the city.
What the fuck?
What the fuck?
And the particular numbers there are, the number of stops were 168,000, and the number of Black men in that age range was 158,000. So obviously what that means is like a lot of repeat stops, because a lot of these are happening in particular communities, you know, so people are getting basically hustled by the police on a regular basis, like the same people over and over again, having done statistically, as Dwight was saying, nothing, and continually being harassed by the NYPD. And of course, one of the other things that this report demonstrated was that although, you know, the disproportionate stops were, although the stops were disproportionately targeting Blacks and Latinos, they yielded a smaller numbers of weapons than the stops of whites did.
Fucking unreal.
So any of the kind of weird racialized arguments that can be made about crime statistics, or like the idea that, you know, oh, well, these are the communities in which these crimes are happening, like statistically, like the internal numbers of the NYPD show that that wasn't true. And so then the question becomes like, why do you do it? And I think, Dwight, when we did our episode, you brought up a really interesting point. And it's like, in what other job could you have a policy, or could you be, you know, engaged in your labor or whatever and fuck up 90% of the time? Because that's effectively what this means, right? That means 9 out of 10 of the cases yield nothing.
Yeah,
right?
if you were to do a job, and if the actual job was to recover weapons and make the streets safer, right, whatever that means, and you fail 90% of the time, well, that's not the job that you're doing.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the point that we got to, is that at the end of the day, even though the stated purpose of it is to recover weapons or to stop crimes or whatever, in practice, the actual de facto purpose of this is to target those communities and harass them and to suppress them, to scare them, to cajole them into, you know, deferring to authority, which in this case would be, you know, the NYPD.
I mean, like in any other situation, you look at that kind of statistics, right, where the stated objective is this, and only, 10% of stops yield successful stated objective. Why the fuck do you keep doing it? Like, that project would be scrapped for, you know, in the first 6 weeks, because it doesn't seem like it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Right.
And only in policing does it seem to be something that is just continued for years and years and years. And the fact that the Constitution protects this kind of shit is, you know, because you can just kind of like sit in that little loophole with the Fourth Amendment and say, well, we had reasonable suspicion that they were about to commit a crime. You know, they had jean pants and it matches the description of someone who robbed a convenience store down the street. You know what I mean? Like, is absolute bullshit. Absolute bullshit.
As Chris said during that episode, he said they're just succeeding by doing it.
Right, exactly. The purpose of it is to do it, right? Like, the purpose of it is to target these communities. And again, to draw the point that, or rather to throw a wrench into the claim that Bloomberg makes that he would be like a different kind of president than Trump or whatever. Prior to the election in 2016, Trump called for a nationwide stop and frisk policy. He was like, it worked great in New York. We should do that everywhere, right? Which shows you that at its core, right, like there's the deep racial injustice and authoritarian component to this policy, which means that it's going to be attractive to a guy like Trump, who's obviously outwardly xenophobic, but it's also going to be attractive to a guy like Bloomberg, which is why he fucking did it. And that's the whole point, right?
Yep.
Maybe, again, in the interest of time, I could talk a little bit about the Muslim surveillance. Just to change things up here, I'm going to read a few different things than I did on that particular episode that we did. But as a primer, Bloomberg became president. Jesus Christ, I said Bloomberg became president. God. Oh my God, cut my mic. I've had too much tequila. Bloomberg became mayor after 9/11, which is one of the reasons why I sort of jokingly, but I actually do seriously say this, that even though Giuliani has kind of paraded himself as the 9/11 mayor just by having the historical fact of having been mayor when the fucking attack happened, Bloomberg really was the 9/11 mayor because he built his entire fucking, style of governance after that. I mean, he switched to the Republican ticket to do that. He later then spoke at the 2004 RNC in support of President Bush at the time in the Iraq War, because the RNC was in New York City at that time, and I still have a shirt from it. I didn't go. I just like the swag, okay? But at the time, one of the things that was going on, and it didn't come out until years later, was that effectively what the NYPD started doing, and this was in the wave of, Islamophobic kind of police practices, and not just domestic police, but obviously like the fucking imperial project of the global war on terror, and how that like kind of ricocheted throughout all of the security agencies, both on a federal and a state and a municipal level. But the NYPD was conducting illegal fucking surveillance of Muslim communities, particularly in northern New Jersey.
Oh, cool.
And just a blatant disregard of their Fourth Amendment rights. And what happened is eventually when the story broke, late in Bloomberg's term as mayor, he said, yeah, this is fine. He said, yeah, that they were doing their job. Like, everybody was scared after 9/11. That's what they were supposed to do. Now, bear in mind, what we're referring to here is just like the illegal surveillance and violation of the constitutional rights of a group of people because they're ethnically different, or in this case, religiously different. Like brown people who believe in a different God or want to pray or have like a different set of community than us. Like, we need to enter their community, we need to surveil them, and we need to treat them as second-class citizens. And again, when it came out, he just defended it, and he's never apologized for it. He's never stepped back from it. I mean, this came out years and years and years ago, and it's still present. There are still calls by a number of groups who tried to engage in lawsuits and stuff. I believe it was, in one case, it was a Yale student group that was doing this. I mean, there's still calls for him to apologize or to address this in some way, and he's just totally swept it under the rug. Right? In his mind, it's probably like, well, this is an emblem of a different era. It's from the past. It was from that crazy time after 9/11 when everybody's scared. We should just walk away from it. And the reality is, no, you shouldn't. Everybody should be held to account for what happened in that time period immediately afterwards, because the reverberations of those things are still happening today. Like, the whole idea, particularly when a guy like Bloomberg, of all fucking people, has the gall to stand up and point at Trump and be like, oh, he's different, he's somehow an aberration, when it's like the entire country went fucking nuts after that event, and many of the people who were in positions of power, or who like levied themselves into positions of power, enacted those kind of brutal police tactics or other kinds of, in this case, just like blatantly anti-constitutional surveillance of this community for no other reason but that they were just scared of them, and that's what the NYPD wanted to do. The NYPD, I'm sorry. I got like a little heated. Give me a second.
Please.
Go for it.
If we want to be a little bit more guttural about it and just give a little bit of shock value, why is there a picture of Michael Bloomberg and Ghislaine Maxwell, the fucking groomer for Jeffrey Epstein? And why did Michael Bloomberg take a trip on Jeffrey Epstein's plane?
These are all good questions.
Straight fucking up. Who is this dude?
I swear to God, man. Like, barring the fact that the dude looks like he can turn into sand at any minute, that he is somehow like he's drank from the wrong holy grail and he's just on the verge of like turning into dust. Like, there's nothing that I have heard about this man that is even remotely redeeming. Like, he is just an absolute slimy piece of shit.
Yep.
And there has been no point in his life where he has not been a slimy piece of shit. And at any moment where he could make a buck off of keeping any portion of any community from actually feeling like human beings, he did it. And, you know, I thought I was going to be able to, like, get out some of this pent-up rage of the last 5 days. And to be honest, it's not really helping.
welcome to
that's
our world.
that's the eat the rich promise. If by the end of 2 hours of screaming at this that you still have more to go, then you're in the right place.
Maybe another point, and this is one thing that we did not really cover in our episode, but I think really bears mentioning here, specifically because you guys have wanted to talk about, like, what would the style of governance of these people be like. And I wanted to point out, again, something that we hadn't really covered in our earlier episode about him, but this sort of came to my attention, and I kind of vaguely remembered some of this. Again, I was like growing up during a lot of this, so I wasn't always privy to the most information. I just always knew whenever I saw Bloomberg on TV that, like, you know, you just have that thing in your back of your spine where you're just like, oh, no. Recently, one of my other friends had pointed this out to me. So last month, Bloomberg did a sort of pseudo-campaign event with Stacey Abrams. And I was wondering, like, why? Like, what's the connection there, right? And the connection there is that he had given her group, the Fair Fight organization, $5 million. And so in that sense, like, obviously, right, the way that you could paint that is like, he's like, well, I'm a philanthropist, or I want to do good for, like, democratic causes, so I'm, like, giving out, you know, some of my outsized fucking wealth to these good, you know, candidates, or these good, like, campaigns, these good causes, and it just so happens that I'm also running for president at the same time. But the real way to read that, right, is a very thinly veiled, essentially, like, bribe, right? It's like, I give your organization a bunch of money, you scratch my back, then you can come on TV with me, you're popular, you'll make me look good at my bid for presidency. And there was something about that, and I was like, you know what, that kind of rings a bell. And so I wanted to, if I may, read a little bit from this BuzzFeed piece from way back in 2013, right as the transition, as Bloomberg was leaving the mayoral office. And it's long. I won't read all of it. I'll just kind of keep reading it until you guys start screaming at me. And I'm not going to read the title of it because it kind of gives it away. But I'm just going to start here. So this is from BuzzFeed News, and I guess I can give the links to you guys so you can include it in the show's notes or whatever. One of Mike Bloomberg's signal accomplishments in New York City was reversing the flow of corruption. In the old days, and in every other city in the world most days, favor seekers bribe politicians, with cash in envelopes, with legal contributions, or with political support. In Mike Bloomberg's New York, the mayor bribed you, buying the silence or cooperation of individuals, cultural organizations, and social service groups with hundreds and millions of dollars spent on small personal favors, a legal payment here, a medical procedure there, and then, of course, charitable contributions. Bloomberg's wealth and his generosity was protection money. In many ways, it inoculated him from potential criticism and stimulated people to do things that they might not have or shouldn't have done, says Doug Muzio, a professor of public affairs at New York's Baruch College. Now the pie is smaller and the needs are larger. In the end, there's going to be enhanced conflict, and it's going to take place in the halls of City Hall, and it's going to be the old days. So here he's referring to the fact that now that Bloomberg's leaving office and when de Blasio is coming in, there's no longer going to be this wealthy mayor who's just going to hand out checks, basically, to get what he wants done. Bloomberg's close aides have always acknowledged that his wealth was, as much as his electoral mandate, a central source of power. But many observers confuse this civic grease for the straightforward millions he spent getting himself elected. The other money has been, for several reasons, hard at times to characterize, a secret lubricant of urban consensus. That's in part because the participants in the machine, the mayor, and the recipients of his largesse, have a shared interest in not talking about it. For a time, he actually gave his contributions through the Carnegie Corporation under a thin veil of anonymity. It's partly because much of it is endless personal generosity in paying for people's medical care, for instance, not ugly quid pro quo influence shopping. And it's partly because the mayor's wealth is wealth on the new scale, wealth that Americans have trouble reckoning with. Not Upper East Side society millions, but billions that can be tapped, practically speaking, without end. He could give every New Yorker $1,000 tomorrow and retain his place after David Koch as the second richest guy in town.
This is like modern day Tammany shit.
Exactly. Here, I'll just read a little bit more. The practice's sordid edge did occasionally slip into view. It was perhaps at its rawest in 2004 when the liberal goodwill the new mayor had gotten simply from not being Rudy Giuliani, who had once tried to shutter the Brooklyn Museum for sacrilege, wore off. That was the beginning of the mayor's first re-election campaign, and he developed a particular and personal dislike for one challenger, the young city council speaker Gifford Milner. My colleague Lizzie Ratner and I heard that a deputy mayor was bluntly threatening cultural institutions that giving Miller money would be seen as disloyal, and reported that the official wasn't talking about recent government support from City Hall. She was referring to about 10 years and tens of millions of dollars worth of arts patronage from Mr. Bloomberg himself. The next year, Bloomberg gave $20 million to 400 different groups, many of whose staffers would, at the next election, show up to testify in favor of extending the city's 2-term limit.
What the fuck?
Jesus fucking Christ.
So, I'll just leave it there. There's a lot more details you can get into. Some of them are kind of fun in the cartoonish kind of Scrooge McDuck way in which he was able to use his money. But this gets into this question of, like, you know, how does a guy like that govern? And in the case of New York City, basically, he just used his money, right? He just paid in a sort of old-style patronage way for favors and support. And he has the money to do it. He's the 9th richest fucking person on the planet with, like, $61 billion, I believe, is his estimated net worth right now. The 9th richest man. And so what I think, you know, the reason why I brought this up in conjunction with the, you know, appearance with Stacey Abrams after giving her group $5 million, and then in conjunction with the fact that, like we mentioned, he's not taking any donations from anybody, and he keeps bragging about that. What that actually means is he could just buy the goodwill of anybody he wants at any given time, right? And who's to say that'll stop when he actually becomes president?
Well, that actually, like, provides a perfect bridge to kind of one of the things that I wanted to talk about. Because, like, in doing, you know, research for this episode, I was kind of particularly looking into Bloomberg's kind of history with unions and with you know, working people. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I have, like, a list here that I'll run through in a minute, but I'll kind of jump ahead to one where you know, Bloomberg, I believe in 2013, or no, so you know, he was mayor from 2002 to 2013. As Shane said, he was a Republican, and then I guess he fancied himself an independent. You know, he didn't kind of make his big kind of announcement of coming back, quote unquote, to the Democratic Party until like 2018. Right. So, you know, like, that was kind of clearly in preparation for this presidential run, which he has, like, wanted to do for a long fucking time. But, you know, to your point, right, about, you know, having that amount of money and being able to buy the goodwill of kind of anybody. Right. You know, like, I was reading through articles where, you know, Bloomberg compared, you know, a teachers union, the United Federation of Teachers, to the NRA.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
Oh my fucking god.
He just, like, openly was shitting on them, and then Randy Weingarten was, like, kind of taking him to task in the media. And then, like, a month ago, Randy Weingarten was like publicly thanking Bloomberg for, like, this huge, you know, multi-million-dollar donation. Like, you know, I'm looking at headlines from a few years back in which you are, like, viciously defending yourself against Bloomberg calling a teachers union, like, the NR-fucking-A, and now, like, yeah, couple $1 million and make that all go away. And it's just, again, it to bring that down to eye level, you know, it really speaks to kind of the shadow game of appearances that money creates, that exploits, you know, our best kind of impulses, and even just our most kind of natural impulses to try to make sense of the world around us and to try to make an informed decision about who we want to vote for president. Right? I mean, you have to add on to that, and you have to be skeptical because, so much of what you are seeing and what you are hearing, right, is the kind of carefully manicured appearance of these interests that wealthy people have, and that they have bought other people off to kind of help them curate for you. Right, to make you think that, a certain thing, and to make you forget, what these people are actually about. And I think so just to kind of maybe jump back and then work my way through some of the kind of worker focused skeletons in Bloomberg's closet, because I think you guys gave a fantastic rundown of like his kind of racist and just really authoritarian policies while he was in office, and his kind of governing style. So I mean, I guess just to make sure that no one's lost, right? I mean, Bloomberg is who you think he is, right? He began his career as at some securities brokerage firm called Salomon Brothers, before forming his own company in 1981 called Bloomberg LP, which is a global financial services, software, and mass media company, right? I mean, he is everywhere.
The Bloomberg terminal, man.
Bloomberg fucking terminal.
I'm sitting at one right now. I've just got... that meme where it's just like the blank face guy and it says stonks? That's me every day. I just sit and I watch the stonks go up and down.
Gotta track those stonks. Need my derivatives. Well, and Shane, you were talking about kind of like, Bloomberg really being the 9/11 president, having kind of taken office in 2001. And, I think another, layer to add to that, right, is like, again, coming in as a Republican, coming in after Giuliani, right? He was walking into kind of a political scene that had been dominated by Giuliani's, like, explicitly anti-labor stances for, what was it, eight years? I mean, like, yeah, like, the unions in New York City, and unions have had a lot of kind of power in New York in a way that is not representative of like kind of the destruction of unions over the past 50 years, right? There still was like a significant kind of influence that unions had in New York City, and to some effect still do, but they have lost a lot of that. And Bloomberg has really, really, helped kind of bring that about. But anyway, and as did Giuliani. But like, anyway, the point being is that when Bloomberg took office, like this was after, Giuliani's terms, just like, stonewalling the shit out of, the unions by, explicitly and blatantly kind of serving the needs of the wealthy and the ruling class at the expense of working people. And so Bloomberg was able to kind of strut in and kind of build this appearance as the kind of more moderate deal maker, right? As someone who could implement a sort of managerial style that could, get labor and kind of the kind of investment class to work together towards, building a better New York, yada, yada, yada. And, there's a great piece that, again, we'll link to in the show notes by John Sirico in the Brooklyn Rail from 2013. And I just want to kind of read, this one passage where John writes, quote, "When Bloomberg took office in 2002, he sought to end the hostile labor climate that had prevailed under his predecessor. You had someone like Mayor Giuliani who really did not have great relations with the unions and ended his term, leaving all the union contracts unsettled," Maria Dulis of the Citizens Budget Commission recalled. The unions really felt like they didn't want to deal with the Giuliani administration anymore because they had to deal with 3 years of wage freezes. That's going to be important because under Bloomberg, city contracts, lapsed again. And so after this had happened with Giuliani, right, Bloomberg kind of walked in again, like kind of saying that he would take a kind of more even-handed approach. A lot of unions kind of threw their support behind him. right? And in this piece that John Sirico writes, he focuses primarily on the District Council Local 37 or DC 37 and the United Federation of Teachers, right? But I mean, they are by no means the only ones. Right, but I believe it was the DC 37 that actually endorsed Bloomberg, right? And then he fucked him over, right? He basically did what Giuliani did in many respects, right? Along with kind of just a long history of anti-union governance, right? One of the things that he did was he let kind of city contracts lapse, and that creates just like a total clusterfuck for workers on the ground who are working on projects that are contracted out by the city. One of which is just like the absolute kind of freezing of wages, and so that kind of, again, it signals what the kind of differences between reality and appearance, right? Because when Bloomberg took office, right, his way of kind of getting the unions to kind of buy into his office and the message that he was peddling, right, was to step in and to kind of negotiate with the unions and to say, look, we're going to raise your wages, but the bargain there is that we're going to restructure your pensions. Right. And we're going, so he tied, raising wages to increase productivity, and, the kind of stick, that the carrot was tied to was this kind of push to restructure the pension system in New York, which is a huge kind of defining feature of his time as mayor. Right. And it was a huge reason why so many kind of unions turned against Bloomberg. Right, because with people like Joe Biden, right, I mean, he was always willing to put on the bargaining table what before then had been sacred, right, which is worker pensions. Worker pensions were not thrown around as this kind of cheap bargaining chip like they are now. Unions and workers fought really, really hard to kind of make sure that they would be taken care of and could live, a comfortable, dignified life after a full career, in their contracts. And, just like Biden with Social Security, Bloomberg was very, willing to kind of open that door, and to say okay, well now we're going to retroactively go back and restructure these because we're trying to kind of balance a budget. We're trying to kind of fix the deficit, so on and so forth. And this kind of message of needing to be fiscally responsible, so on and so forth, I think it really started to ring more and more hollow as Bloomberg's tenure went on, especially as he himself increased his personal wealth by, just leaps and bounds. And, while Wall Street was busy destroying the fucking world, and, but still kind of, it was very clear that Bloomberg was working for Wall Street, was enriching, people on Wall Street, and was prioritizing the needs and wants of Wall Street over those of not only unions, but of working class people around the city. Right. And so I again, I don't want to go into kind of all the details, I guess, since, we are kind of running a little long. And so I will include a lot of links in the show notes for listeners to kind of dig into this a bit more. But I mean, just a few other kind of examples of what Bloomberg really thinks of working people and how, he actually treated them during his tenure as mayor of New York. Right, I already mentioned that, he fucked over, the unions that initially supported him, not only by restructuring their pensions and letting kind of city contracts lapse, but, he compared the teachers union, UFT, to the NRA. He called openly for a teacher to be fired because of her past with sex work. I mean, he is an unabashed misogynist as well. There was the time that Bloomberg's company violated the very same paid sick leave law that he himself tried to veto as mayor, a veto that was actually overturned. But it's a law that says that, your employer cannot ask for a doctor's note if you're out sick before 3 days. And I think the standard is more or less that most businesses kind of go by the standard of 5 days. Bloomberg's company was asking people for, doctor's notes like the day of and stuff like that, even though it was expressly illegal to do so. Bloomberg also, early on in his kind of tenure as mayor, he kind of infamously fired Edward Greenwood IX, who worked for 6 years as an assistant in the city's lobbying office in Albany. He was supporting, his wife and kid on $27,000 a year. But Bloomberg fired him because when he showed up to the office to do a photo op, he saw that Edward had left, a solitaire window up on his computer.
Oh my God!
Yeah, and so this kind of became a whole thing, and Bloomberg very unapologetically said that the firing was justified, even though this guy had worked there for 6 years.
Oh my God!
In 2012, Bloomberg was heavily criticized by the labor community for gutting the city's childcare programs and implementing a program called Early Learn, which resulted in just like a lot of classrooms and after-school programs and daycare programs being closed. It resulted in hundreds of union workers losing their jobs. And, in one of the articles we'll link in the show notes, a lot of those union workers were then stuck like protesting in front of City Hall to try to get the back pay that they were owed, but that the city was stiffing them on. Right. But I think like the two things that I wanted to kind of end with, the two things that really, really characterize Bloomberg's time as mayor and that really kind of give you a perfect window onto kind of what his administration would look like, including everything that we've been talking about so far with the ways that he, has been so willing to, sacrifice civil liberties to target the most vulnerable members of society, but on top of that, he's proven time and again that, like we were saying, his interests are with the capitalist class, not with workers. And one of the kind of best examples of that is the bus driver strike of 2013. Right, there was a month-long strike in January of 2013 with Local 1181 of the Amalgamated Transit Union. Right, the strike had begun over Bloomberg's decision to strip employee protections from contracts that the city had signed with private companies that run the buses. And when the union pushed back, Bloomberg and his administration just completely stonewalled them and said that they were not going to budge. So the ATU went on strike for a month. Right, the strike affected more than 100,000 students, tens of thousands of which were children with special needs who often had to travel long distances. And Bloomberg waited him out. He pulled a Reagan, right? I mean, he broke the strike. He waited until the strike fund was run dry, until people could no longer sustain themselves without a paycheck. And he declared victory, when the bus drivers went back to work, and he even gloated about it, saying, and I quote, "In the city's entire history, the special interests have never had less power than they do today. And the end of this strike reflects the fact that when we say we put children first, we mean it." End quote.
We have told the unions in unequivocal terms, do not walk out on our students. A strike would not only be unfair to children and families, it would be totally misguided, because the city cannot legally offer what the unions are demanding. It is just mashugana, as we say in Gaelic.
The whole thing in a nutshell is our job security. In other words, if our company were to fold tomorrow and the routes go to different companies, we follow the work. And everything stays the same, our pay scale stays the same, and all that. It's very simple. This is all we want, and this is what we're fighting for. Where he says we don't care about the children, that's nonsense. I told you I read somewhere with his condescending attitude. He's trying to tell the public, don't believe them, they're selfish, they're out for themselves. Yeah, we are out for ourselves. We have families to support, we have children to raise, we need to live. Again, we're just working class people, we're working to survive. You know, them, they got the millions of dollars, thousands of dollars, whatever. They don't have to worry about raising children, clothing them, feeding them, paying rent, paying mortgage, paying your everyday bills. You know, a lot of us, we don't have luxuries.
We have tax breaks. We don't have any
we
tax
don't,
breaks.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But still, you know, they don't have to worry about these things. You know, I'd like him to live my life for a month.
So the special interests, right? I guess I wanted to bring that up to kind of tie it to his whole, you know, I'm not beholden to special interest thing, right? This is what he means when he talks about special interest, right? It's not just kind of corporate PACs and shadowy lobbying groups. It's like you all were saying, it is you, it is the people, it is the organizations, however meager they are, that we have developed to try to advocate for ourselves and our needs. He considers those just as much, you know, like of a influence he doesn't have to listen to as anything else, and he's proven it in his track record. And you know, on top of that, the thing that I wanted to kind of end with, the thing that I think encapsulates the kind of political career of Bloomberg and what, you know, our country would have to look forward to under a Bloomberg presidency is Hudson Yards.
Oh, fuck. Oh, man.
Oh, you hit the Dwight button on that one.
Buddy. Woo! Let's go, buddy. Let's do it.
So, you know, Hudson Yards is, you know, the nation's largest private real estate project ever.
Barf.
And I mean, it is received over $6 billion in taxpayer subsidies, and you know the amount of investment that has gone into this kind of just massive multi-building, multi-compound real estate project, right? Is once again, like we were saying before, practically unfathomable. Right. And, you know, Bloomberg was integral to kind of pushing the deal along that would result in the building of Hudson Yards, including kind of pushing through the rezoning, you know, working out kind of the public transit, so on and so forth. And, you know, I think there's so much. Yeah, we could do a whole episode on Hudson Yards, and in fact, we did a mini cast a couple months ago with an electrician who has worked on Hudson Yards and who was part of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and we talked about his experience working on one of the buildings, specifically in regards to kind of like the labor politics on the work site, and the divide between unionized workers and non-unionized, heavily undocumented workers, right? And again, I think the more that you look into Hudson Yards, the more that you see all of this shit, kind of just everything that Bloomberg is about is wrapped up and embodied in there. I mean, the biggest tenant, does anyone know the biggest tenant at Hudson Yards?
Oh, no. I was trying to think of something that wasn't terrible or actionable, but no. So please.
No. Think of something terrible.
Tons of terrible and actionable things.
I know, man. That was tough. Yeah. That was tough. I'll just go with no.
The same controlled demolition that was in the towers.
No. So the biggest tenant at Hudson Yards is BlackRock. The giant financial the giant financial company that manages $5 trillion in assets. The company, in fact, that if listeners recall the big special episode we did on the French general strike that's still ongoing, by the way. You know, and that was kind of prompted by proposed neoliberalized pension reforms by Emmanuel Macron. Like workers on strike have actually stormed the European headquarters of BlackRock and set like a bonfire in the foyer because they know that, you know, this is like the shadowy kind of, you know, investment company that, you know, is trying to kind of force the American model of pension reform, you know, into France's system, which is much more, you know, built on a premise of solidarity and taking care of past and future generations than fucking ours is. And French people don't want that. They know that BlackRock is really calling the shots. And so, you know, But BlackRock there is kind of operated in secret. In America, it's not the case. They're very much kind of proudly flaunting their influence over our political economy. And so, yeah, this deal that was struck with Hudson Yards, between BlackRock, state officials, and related companies, which is the developer behind Hudson Yards. The three parties did not release the information about how much the deal was worth. But we do know that, according to the New York Times, quote, in return for keeping 2,600 jobs in Manhattan and pledging to create another 700, BlackRock obtains special tax credits from the state worth up to $25 million. And this is a investment company that has $5 trillion in assets. So that's one kind of harrowing example. There's a lot more that's tied up with this. The very founding of Hudson Yards, the very construction of Hudson Yards is riddled with kind of labor struggles, right? And it was initially, in the first phase, a closed shop construction site, meaning that, it was union workers who were going to be building, the first phase of Hudson Yards. But then the developer, related companies, kind of essentially declared war on the unions and more or less won, with the help of city and state officials, right? They rejected the premise that they should, continue the second phase through a closed shop policy, and instead wanted to, basically bring in lower wage and lower skilled and more vulnerable and even undocumented workers to kind of cut costs, but also undermine the unions themselves. And, we'll link to kind of articles in the show notes that kind of explain, the really gross and underhanded ways that related companies was able to kind of undercut a very long strike and sympathy strike that was held kind of in opposition to, what they were planning to do. But eventually, they kind of, related companies found a workaround. They found it was just a textbook example of kind of using undemocratic union hierarchies to kind of lobby in Washington to undercut the local leadership in New York, after which that local leadership was fired, to use the threat of lower wage and undocumented workers to undercut the wages of unionized workers who have much higher standards for, the work that they do. It's just there's a whole kind of fucking ecosystem that, the forces of capital have been trying to systematically dismantle, and Hudson Yards kind of brings that to the fore. But, ultimately, I think, tied up in all of that, tied up in all of the shitty Tammany-style politics that went into securing the deal for Hudson Yards, the interests that are kind of pouring their money into Hudson Yards and are moving their operations to Hudson Yards, the labor battles that characterize the construction of Hudson Yards, and the ways that those battles kind of exacerbated kind of the tensions between different segments of workers, and that actively tried to pit different segments of workers against one another for the, express benefit of the fucking bosses. What came from it, right? Given all of that shit, what comes from it? This like fucking mecca of billionaires, right? This kind of untouchable, pristine part of the city that is literally been described as a playground for billionaires, that is being built by people who will never be able to access it, that is being built by people who know that this is going to make this part of the city completely, inaccessible to, working class people the city over. Right? It's just not going to be that. No matter how much they want to kind of say, it's like, oh, well, there's a public school there. There's a hospital there. Again, listen to the episode that we did, on Hudson Yards, and you'll realize that, like, no, like this was never meant for, the majority of the people in New York City. This was meant, to kind of as a like flag planted in the ground to say, this is what, this model of governance, this marriage between capital and, technocratic, business-minded, quote-unquote business-friendly governance that is embodied in the Democratic establishment and the Republican Party as well. This is what it culminates in. It culminates in exploiting workers, pitting them against each other, using everything at your disposal, including nativism and racism and whatever the fuck. And, ultimately ending up with just kind of this, beautifully manicured, steely and glassy city that, is the express property of the rich, while the rest of us are on the outside looking in. I think that is kind of the promise of Bloomberg's politics.
I'm finding all these horrible op-eds about Bloomberg, and
he's dangerous, man.
He is. Okay, if it doesn't tell you anything about Bloomberg as a person, is when there are op-eds who are decrying that he is destroying his, quote, brand by offering... What was this? What does this say? What is that? Third mistake of his campaign? Everyone attacks Trump personally. It hasn't been very effective so far. Offering to support any ultimate Democratic candidate to defeat Trump has painted Bloomberg further into the radical left corner. He's destroying his brand. Many of the voters he needs are the centrists who detest Trump's behavior but are more aligned with his policies than with those of the radical progressive revolutionaries. So when you have people in the Hill who are writing these op-eds about Bloomberg destroying his, quote, brand, like,
he's too damn left. He's
just
clearly
not
appealing
electable
to us. He's appealing to us too hard. And for that reason, like, we watch his ice cream ad and we go, oh my God, that's our guy. And we just, like, if he wants to get elected, he can't do that. He cannot eat ice cream anymore.
No, but Max, I really do think that you had some really important points about just the way that Bloomberg has continuously fucked over anyone who doesn't sit within his tax bracket, and has done everything that he can do to make that disparity.
Those that don't sit in his tax bracket, you mean 6.9 billion people?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to guess if you're listening to this podcast right now, you're not in that bracket.
Probably not.
As somebody who is in that bracket, I like the guy. I find him highly relatable.
He's got the electability that we're looking for.
Yeah, that's right. I think the one benefit, just as maybe a wrap up to Bloomberg, the one benefit of, like, him potentially being on the debate stage, because I mean that's something we didn't even get into, like the DNC changing its criteria so that he can be in the next debate. I think the one advantage of that is that everybody will get a really clear view.
Okay.
All right. You know what I mean? Like, he'll be right there. And everybody can
We're
see.
We're guests, Shane.
What's
We're
going
guests.
on with him.
This is Max's show. Please.
All I said is I want to look at him.
All right.
Oh, man. I'm just curious. I am curious to see if he's going to be able to hold up his brand of messaging when he's not hiding behind $300 million worth of TV ads. I want to know. I'm curious to see what's going to happen.
He's not good at speaking. Like, he's not like an orator or whatever. I mean, besides, like, I mean, they're going to fawn over him anyway in the press, and he's going to have some, like, calculated fucking line that was developed in a lab by, like 400 technicians who tried to come up with, like, a human-sounding phrase. And he's going to say something, but, like, it's not up, it's down. And people are going to be like, well, you got to give him credit for putting a string of words together that sounds coherent on stage.
Now that I say that, I'm curious to see how that's going to go. I'm just not looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. There's a space in my wall that doesn't have a hole in it yet. So...
Well, I mean, on that note, I mean, I know this is turned into another, behemoth of an episode, but I think it's been a great conversation, and I really, really hope that that it's been useful for people. And please, let us know, like, hit us in the DMs, tweet at us, let us know if these are helpful, if there are other topics that you want us to cover with these sorts of panels, but. Gang, I think maybe to kind of round things out, Shane, you were kind of, eking over there, but I guess, like, without maybe reserving, like the bulk of what we want to say for perhaps another episode. I think, taking all of this together, let's zoom back out to kind of where we started, and maybe share some final thoughts about like, what this says about our political system, that Bloomberg and Steyer are not only, like able to kind of run these presidential campaigns, but are actually able to, run viable campaigns. And that Bloomberg, as we've kind of said, he's stating it very openly. Like, he is running by openly exploiting everything that is wrong with this system. He is openly declaring as some sort of virtue the fact that he is able to buy his way in to viability without any kind of individual, donors, without any sort of accountability to voters or to, let alone working people and the institutions that we have developed to represent our interests. Like, what does this fucking say about our system? And I guess, what are maybe like some final words you have to kind of keep people from getting too kind of demoralized or for channeling their energies and their anger in the right direction?
It's the false meritocracy that we always like to talk about, man.
Oh,
if you
man.
look at Bloomberg as a guy who's got a ton of money, and when you conflate the idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, that is your goal, right? You'll be Bloomberg with all of this money. Same with Steyer, the self-made billionaire who, made his billions because he worked hard, and, the sweat on his back hasn't cooled yet as he's like moving into the presidency. And so when you see something like that, it's not that difficult to see that many people will take a look at that and view that as the gold standard for working hard and getting ahead in life. And I really do think that that's a major reason why we continue to see billionaires in our political process, because you see this as sort of like the end all be all. If you work for the rest of your life really hard, maybe you'll get to that point and it will be on your own merits. When in reality, if you're not born into that class, the likelihood of you getting there without, purposefully or accidentally killing a population of people to do it is extremely low. And, it's not something I personally find that to be more of a comfort than something that pisses me off, because I can now look at the effort that I put into my own personal life as someone who is part of like the working class, someone who is continuously working on projects myself. It's not through any fault of mine that I haven't reached that status. Right. And I can continue to have a little bit of hope for hopefully what is going to be a transformed country in the next 10 to 15 years, starting with Bernie Sanders, and my work is still important, even if someone like Mike Bloomberg would never even like recognize that I have like facial features in a crowd,
I mean, I have something, that's maybe slightly less productive on a real level to say, but I mean, at least in an interpersonal way, it's something that will bring me genuine joy, given the amount that I like personally detest this fucking person. And I was joking about the debates a second ago, but I think one of the values of it is like to really put these people on a public stage and watch them just flounder. Like I really, and I try to hesitate from making too many like public predictions or whatever, because then somebody can always post you back and be like, oh, you fucked up or something. But I don't care. With this one, I'm going to say Bloomberg is like literally dead in the water as like as a serious candidate. Like, everybody knows that. He knows that. The whole reason he's running is just try to peel delegates off of, the progressive coalition that's been built around Bernie. Like, that's the only reason. But the flip side to it, right, and this also goes with like Steyer as well, right, is that I think what happened is when Trump ran and everybody was like, oh, he could never win or whatever, and then he did, the billionaire class thought to themselves, like, well, shit, I guess I could just run then. Like, any rich guy can run. But the difference is that with Trump in particular, part of his appeal is that he was also already famous. He was a media personality. It's not just the fact that he had money or that he was a business guy. In fact, he wasn't even a very good businessman. His whole thing was just he had a persona and a certain attitude, and he already had a huge audience for that. So when these other, like, weird, cryptid, fucking fake, zoological creatures come out of the fucking billionaire class and, like, rear their heads on stage, everybody immediately sees them, and there's no base for that. Like, there is no base. There is no Bloomberg base, period. It's the same thing with, like, Zuckerberg, when they talk about him, like, oh, maybe he'll, he'll do a run. He looks like he's from The Sims. And I'm not just talking about, like, the way, physically he looks or whatever, just like his vacant face is devoid of humanity. And it's the same fucking thing with Bloomberg. He'll get on stage, he'll do the Bloombito thing that you were doing, Dwight, and that may work in a city where, you can just wield and throw your money around to a bunch of, like, located, centralized institutions, but it'll never work nationally. He can pay off as many people in the DNC or in the Democratic Party to come and do an event with him or whatever, but he has no charisma. And for that alone, I'm going to enjoy watching him make a total fucking idiot of himself on the national stage.
I am curious to see how his polling goes after this debate, because we were concerned, Max and I have had a couple of conversations about just how concerning it is that he's sort of like filled in the vacuum left by a horrible Biden performance in Iowa and is like gotten extremely good poll numbers as a result of that. And I'm curious to see how that's going to be affected by the fact that almost no one has really, outside of New York, has really seen Mike Bloomberg outside of his commercials. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if that's going to change people's conception of it. And I think I agree, Shane. I think that what's going to happen is people are going to see him on the debate stage and they're not going to see what they see in the commercials. And it's going to be probably jarring and is definitely going to have people rethinking their own thoughts about who they are going to vote for in primaries. Like, no matter how much money you pump into it, if you don't have that charisma, you're not going to get very far,
Yeah, dude, class interests, right? I mean, Bloomberg's a billionaire. He's one of the richest people on earth. It's in his interest to retain the amount of money that he has and retain the amount of power that he has. And he's going to do so in the psycho-authoritarian way that he governed as mayor of New York City. I don't think it's going to translate in the same way that, like, the words that Bernie are saying on stage, he can't fucking touch it. So I hope he wastes $350 million that he could have spent buying off medical debt or something.
Well, I mean, as long as he wastes the money, if he's going to waste it, hopefully it's on a campaign that'll go nowhere.
Yeah.
It could go somewhere else. We will at some point reappropriate the wealth through nice means.
Nice.
Yeah.
Super nice
that's
means.
right.
Yeah, definitely.
I also I forgot that there was one other great bullet point on my list of horrible Bloomberg facts that I forgot to mention.
The never-ending list.
Yeah.
Man.
Well, this one's fantastic, so I wanted to throw it in real quick. But in 2012, there was a living wage bill in the city that would require some recipients of large economic development subsidies to pay their employees at least $10 an hour. Bloomberg compared it to Soviet communism, and he vowed to veto it. And if the veto was overridden, he had vowed that his administration would file a lawsuit against it. Right? And I mean, maybe it's good that I forgot it and can bring it up now, because I think it speaks to what you were just saying, Mel. Is like, yeah, I mean, like, it's so easy for all of us to get demoralized by this process because, yeah, you look at it, you see what we're up against, right? We saw in Iowa, I think there was a little of disbelief because a lot of us were like, well, surely the rat fuckery wouldn't be this brazen, would it? But I mean, I think our kind of conspiratorial impulses, even if like the conspiracy doesn't go as deep as some may think it does. I mean, there's still a very clear and obvious and unabashed kind of movement to stop Bernie Sanders from getting the nomination. Right? There's a whole hell of a lot of powerful people who do not want that to happen, right? And there are institutions that, whether through sheer incompetence or through kind of active machinations, will, do what they can to put their thumb on the scale and to resist, like the will of the people, and to make this kind of already hardly democratic system even less democratic. And, I think the thing that I've been thinking about all day, right, after a week of just getting kind of progressively more pissed off and demoralized by the fact that it was working, by the fact that, like, I can see what the DNC is doing. I could see what the media is doing by, like, not releasing the voting totals and then releasing just some of them so that a media narrative can build around Pete Buttigieg. And, like, then, like, everything gets swept up in the State of the Union news and, the impeachment news, to the point where any sort of, like, emotional or moral victory, any sort of like momentous kind of narrative victory that could have resulted from Bernie kind of outright winning Iowa and that victory being announced on Monday night, has been dissipated, right? And by all accounts, they achieved that goal of keeping us from having that sort of victory leading into New Hampshire. But I think it's easy to get demoralized by that. It's easy to get really furious about it. And I think we should get furious about it. At the same time that we've been researching this fucking episode, everything that we've been talking about today makes me more furious, right? But
let the rage like fuel you.
Exactly.
Man.
Exactly.
Like I feel like a lot of like hardcore Bernie supporters are going to see the results that have finally come out of Iowa and be heartened by it, right? Like, most grassroots campaigning for Bernie was not necessarily looking at momentum in Iowa in the same way that the libs do, right? I think that most of us were pretty confident that Bernie could move forward. I'm surprised that Buttigieg got as far as he did, just because polling did not match up with that. I'm extremely happy that Biden shit the bed in the first fucking primary of the year. And so I see those things as things to get fucking stoked about, and everything else that makes me angry is just another reason to go text bank for Bernie, man.
Agreed. No, I think that's what I want the takeaway to be for people, right? Is like, I think I've kind of like with conversations with comrades like you all and kind of seeing kind of just the tremendous efforts that people are pouring into, a movement that exceeds, Bernie Sanders himself, right? To see the images of these satellite caucuses of people of color, of immigrants, of workers, who work the second shift at a meat processing plant, going almost entirely for Bernie Sanders and being pulled in by people who are, promoting a message of, building working class solidarity, of fighting against the kind of powerful corporate and elite interests that have governed so much of our fucking lives and that have had a stranglehold over our political system for so long. The fact that people are buying into that and are kind of showing up and are saying like, yeah, we're in this, we've had enough. Like that's fucking something. Like that is like, I think, like what, like the makings of a movement look like. The movement, the likes of which, like this country is not used to, that we are bringing the people, who have been lost and forgotten and fucked over by people like Mike Bloomberg for so long into a kind of grassroots movement to say that we've had a fucking enough, and we're not going to stop no matter how much you try to kind of rat fuck us with like this kind of bureaucratic bullshit in Iowa, or this kind of like obvious media bias by companies that are owned by people like Mike Bloomberg. Like at this point I'm kind of like, bring it the fuck on, right? Like we are ready, right? We are mobilized. We are, like talking to people. We are doing what we need to do to build working class solidarity and to normalize the message that it doesn't have to be this way, that we deserve more than this, and that together we can build, a world that is more just and that, is more democratic and that recognizes kind of the dignity of human life in a way that our current system does not. So honestly, I say fucking bring it on, and we're ready.